An unprecedented disaster was approaching the city, and the sounds of explosions thundered one after another incessantly. It was like some strange dream in which a huge beast blocks the sun, darkens the sky, and seems familiar and close. The man stood next to the monster and thought that everything seemed so strange, as if he and the monster were one. It was as if this huge monster was subordinate to the man, as if it were a part of him. He looked at the monster, watching his every move with enviable confidence in his eyes. And then a stream of fire burst from the monster's mouth, incinerating everything in its path, destroying buildings and people. Civilians ran restlessly through the streets, seeking shelter from this unprecedented disaster, and feared that this moment might be their last. The man sat on the roof of the building and thought that the world honored him as if he were God himself. The huge monster behind him made the observers tremble with fear with its very appearance. The news was full of reports from the scene, saying that a huge monster had appeared. To the sounds of the report, a man with a bloody hand came to on an office desk. He couldn't open his eyelids, but he immediately realized that he was not in his own body. Then the little iguana opened its eyes and looked at the man lying on the table. At that moment, the man realized that he was in the body of an iguana, and next to him was someone with a bloody hand. He jumped in realization and mentally cursed at the fact that he had turned into a marine iguana. His former name was Chen, a second-year student at Ning University. The young man rented a place to live at his own expense because living in a dorm did not seem like a good prospect, and he also liked cold-blooded animals. One day, a new batch of exotic pets arrived at the pet store, and his gaze was immediately drawn to a marine iguana. The animal looked cute, but looked at people with caution. Usually iguanas were affectionate, but this time, something went wrong and the iguana attacked him. The animal bit the young man on the arm, leaving a bloody mark from its teeth. But the young man did not lose his composure and raised his other hand with the phone in order to knock the pet off his hand. The next second, he hit the iguana on the head, and it finally left him alone. But for some unknown reason, immediately after hitting the iguana, the young man felt pain in his head, as if he himself had been hit. From such a sharp blow, he fainted, but now, having woken up, everything has changed. He opened his eyes, and his consciousness finally moved into the human body. The young man decided to test his theory and raised his hand up, after which the iguana also raised its paw. Chen looked at everything that was happening in shock, as he was able to control the lizard's body as if it were a puppet. He compared it to something like a golden finger and thought that perhaps he was starting his hero's journey. And then his thoughts returned to the right track, and Chen began to think about how to sell the iguana more profitably. And all because he couldn't believe that he was destined to be a hero, because he didn't get any cheats and no system appeared in front of him. All he was left with was a small lizard stuck in a room with no way it could do any serious damage to anyone. Night was approaching the city, and the lights in the windows of the houses opposite were gradually beginning to come on. Chen thought that he hadn't eaten anything all day, and he should also feed the iguana. The young man looked at his pet and thought that the iguana would be satisfied with regular meat. He found a pre-cooked steak and opened the package, getting ready to start cooking. It turned out that Chen was skilled in using a knife and other kitchen utensils. And just a few minutes later, a well-cooked steak stood in front of the iguana. Looking at the animal wolfing down the food, Chen thought that he was right about it not being picky about food. Suddenly, the idyll was destroyed by a system announcement that said that after eating, the pet received 5 evolution points. His card in the system also appeared in front of him, where his characteristics, traits, and talent for mind control were listed. Chen was shocked by what he saw before him. He wanted a system, so here is a system. Then he turned the page in the system ad and read the iguana's specifications. It said that the iguana needs 200 evolution points to reach a new level. The young man immediately remembered how they tried to train him in martial arts as a child. He was then told that the root of his strength was in his legs, and therefore he needed to adopt the correct stance to strike. Little Chen, not being prepared for such training, asked his father to take a break. But the man was adamant, so he said that only cowards give up halfway. Chen gathered his strength and declared that he did not want to be a coward. Within minutes, he was running laps around the stadium, his father shouting at him to move his legs harder. While running, the boy became so tired that he didn't notice how he tripped over a pebble lying on the road. He fell and hit his shoulder painfully, sliding along the ground for several meters. He no longer had the strength to run any further, so young Chen didn't even try to get up from the ground. His father came up to him and told him to get up because no one would give him a helping hand in his adult life. This memory was interrupted and switched to a new one, where Chen, already a little older, was taking the box from his father's hands. His father gave him all his savings and told him that he had to go on a long journey, so he would walk the rest of the way himself. He asked the boy not to neglect his martial arts training because the world was not so kind and good. The boy, with tears in his eyes, asked his father when they would meet again, and he said that they would meet when he became a great master, although he then pulled himself up short, adding that if, of course, he was still alive by that time. These were the last parting words from his father in the boy's life. Chenchu clearly remembered the day his father walked out of their apartment without any extra luggage. The wooden door slammed behind the man who never appeared in the boy's life again. Looking at the photo of him and his father hanging on the wall, Chenchu thought that it took him 10 years to realize everything. His thoughts were interrupted for a moment by the contented sigh of a well-fed lizard. Chenchu looked at his pet and thought that he was eating very quickly, and then something about this iguana caught his attention. Light streaks of light spread across the small animal's body like lightning, and Chenchu thought that the iguana was growing. The young man looked at the system screen again to make sure that the food had brought the iguana 15 evolution points. After rereading the statistics a few more times, the young man looked away, distracted by something. There, in the reflection in the mirror, he saw himself, but now his body seemed to look different. He became convinced that his body had not been so fit before, and the glasses the iguana had received were affecting him as well. Chenchu thought that if the iguana scored more points, it would be able to evolve, perhaps even grow as huge as in his dream. Remembering that dream, a huge monster immediately appeared before the young man's eyes, blocking the sky. Chenchu thought that if things turned out like this, he would become a great martial artist. The next day, the first thing Chenchu did was go to the market to stock up on food for the iguana. He paid for his huge order with a card by placing his phone on the payment terminal. Looking at all the meat and food he had loaded into the trunk, the young man hoped that it would be enough. Chenchu slammed the trunk shut, still wondering if his actions were correct. Having parked his car near the house, the young man carried out all the shopping bags one by one. All the shopping took up a good half of the day, so he returned home after noon. Chenchu immediately prepared several simple dishes and placed them on the table in front of the iguana. The young man thought that the more his iguana ate, the faster he would become a master of martial arts. The animal looked at all the dishes in front of him with fascination in his eyes and was ready to start eating. After finishing the meal, the iguana began to grow again, and Chenchu, having analyzed everything, thought that the pork was not as good as the beef. Chenchu thought that in the future he would need to change the iguana's diet a little. He stretched and decided that next time he would take more beef. After feeding his animal, Chenchu went to the training room to hit the punching bag. As he struck the punching bag again, he was surprised at how much force was put into it. The poor equipment was crushed under the onslaught of the young man's strong attack, and he was perplexed. The system issued a notification that after intense training, his experience had increased by 5. After 2 days of such hard training, there were already quite a few dents left on the punching bag. Chenchu thought that the feeling of his strength growing after training was amazing. He swung his arm, preparing to deliver another merciless blow to the punching bag. And after this kick, the punching bag inopportunely broke in the middle. Now, the system characteristics said that his pet was only 5 points short of evolution. The young man looked at the statistics a little more and thought that from the perspective of traditional martial arts, he had achieved success. With such indicators, he would have already reached the pinnacle of the martial arts realm. Chenchu remembered that his father told him that the martial arts fields were divided into 3 types, the pinnacle of which would make him a first-class fighter. The second, Dark Kingdom, could make him a fighter capable of fighting 100 at once. But Transformation, the highest realm, could make him capable of fighting 1,000. There were great martial arts masters in this world whose names were immortalized in history. The realm of transformation was an indestructible body according to ancient texts. Chenchu listened to the story and asked what kingdom his father was in now. And he replied that so far he had only been in the Dark Kingdom, but everything was still ahead. Little Chenchu said that his father was very cool and asked if he came from a legendary family. As soon as this question was asked, his father frowned and made an unreadable expression on his face. Then, having thought of what to answer, he said that he did not come from a legendary family at all. The memory ended, and sunset was already descending on the city. Chenchu walked into the room with his pet, who was already the size of a sofa, and said that it was growing by the hour. He also noted that after one more meal, evolution would occur, so he hoped that the iguana would not disappoint him. Chenchu fed the iguana, and the system began to rapidly raise the pet's evolution points. When the number was almost there, Chenchu thought that he couldn't wait. The iguana finished eating, and the system informed its owner that it was ready to evolve. The next moment, some strange impulse passed through the iguana's skin again, but this time it was golden in color. The next moment, Chenchu felt the pain that the iguana was also experiencing. The young man lay on the floor trying to somehow reduce the pain, and several spikes were bursting out of the iguana's back. The next moment, the iguana, shaking in pain, evolved by adding spikes all over its body. She began to rush around the apartment as if scalded, knocking down everything in her path. Chen Chu lay flat on the floor and thought that he didn't know it would hurt so much. Then he noticed something out of the corner of his eye and decided to go check out the situation. There, in the middle of the completely destroyed room, stood his iguana, but now the pogrom did not bother him. Now Chen Chu faces a new challenge, which is to test the iguana's new abilities. He threw some object towards the animal, and the iguana's tail immediately cut it in two. The young man looked at his pet and thought that the iguana now had unusual power. Another pleasant surprise was that after the iguana evolved, his own attributes and physique doubled. Chen Chu couldn't say for sure since he didn't really feel anything because he was still too weak. But as he evolved, his attributes actually grew. And this meant that his strength would also increase in the future. And then he would be able to surpass everyone. After figuring out his new abilities, Chen Chu finally noticed the chaos in the room. He also thought that the iguana had become too huge, so now it couldn't even fit into the room. The young man came to the sea, taking the iguana with him and thinking that it seemed necessary to return it to its natural habitat. Stopping at the shore, he said that they were there and was about to get out of the car. Chen Chu and the iguana got out of the car and saw a beautiful evening seascape in front of them. The young man breathed in the salty air and relaxed a little. The iguana immediately went to the water, moving away from its owner. A few moments later, her entire body was hidden under the thickness of water. Chen Chu had gotten a little better at his abilities and could now activate his sixth sense. Now he could feel everything that happened within a radius of 10 meters from him. The iguana swam further downstream, meeting more and more sea creatures. Chen Chu, who was next to the iguana, spiritually saw a fish that had 5 eyes. He thought that such a fish would be an excellent target for his iguana, and directed the animal there. The iguana approached the strange, frightened-looking fish in a threatening manner. An unequal collision between two animals occurred underwater and sand rose from the bottom. The next moment, an animal much larger than the iguana appeared from somewhere. But the iguana had no plans to give up, so, deciding not to notice anything, it pounced on the small fish. Chen Chu's pet bit through the skin of some poor fish, and from that moment on, it was doomed to die and be eaten. After being eaten, the marine iguana gained 10 evolution points and Chen Chu gained 1 more to his constitution. Chen Chu thought that after evolution, he would get 1 point for every meal, but the mutated fish would give him 10. With the appearance of such a creature in the ocean, it seems that the world is far from peaceful. The iguana noticed another fish and immediately pounced on it, biting into the poor sea creature. The iguana continued to gain evolution points by consuming some fish that brought more rewards. The system reminded him of the daily limit of 100 points, and Chen Chu looked at the underwater world with the eyes of an iguana, fascinated, and thought about how wonderful it all was. Being an amphibian, the marine iguana could survive in fresh water for a long time, but due to the lack of gills, it had to rely on its lungs. Therefore, Chen Chu had to climb to the surface every time to breathe. Having wandered into some cave, the iguana climbed out of the water and looked around. Chen Chu thought that this was a good place to hide, so he was going to leave the iguana here for now. Having figured out the iguana's new place of residence, the young man climbed into the car and decided that it was time to go home. It was night outside, so Chen Chu drove on empty roads with his headlights on. Sometimes he stopped his gaze on some objects flying past him, but continued moving. Having driven into some strange and scary neighborhood, the young man thought that he did not understand how people could live here. Suddenly, cries for help came from some box somewhere very close. Something was clearly happening in the house on the side of the road, and it could not go unnoticed by Chen Chu. The young man thought that it seemed like the time had come to put his powers into practice. Strange men were talking behind the slightly open door of the house about whether the car had left. Returning from their post on guard, they approached the man who was trying to shut up the frightened girl. The leader of this gang immediately pushed the man, saying that he should have put a gag in the girl's mouth so that she wouldn't scream like that. And that man, in his defense, said that it was too dark in that place to do anything. The girl looked at everything that was happening with horror in her eyes, not believing that she could be saved. The leader touched her face and told her to behave well, otherwise he would leave her with his guys for the whole night. Meanwhile, Chen Chu parked somewhere nearby and got out of the car, preparing to jump in. He listened to what was happening inside the building, and a picture of the plan of this house formed in his head. At this moment, his cultivation reached such heights that he saw everything that was happening in front of him, as if the wall in front of him was not there. At the same time, inside the house, the kidnappers sat down at the table, pouring drinks and talking about something. The tied-up girl sat leaning against the wall, trembling with fear. A young man stood by one of the walls, looking now at the girl, now at his phone. Chen Chu thought that these people were armed with 2 knives and that this was human trafficking. Therefore, it was better to deal with them as soon as possible. Chen Chu smashed the door to the little house with one powerful blow, sending plaster flying and dust flying. 2 of the kidnappers immediately took out their weapons, intending to deal with the unknown young man. But Chen Chu was faster and hit one of them, leaving the other one to look on in bewilderment. But then karma caught up with him too, as the second kidnapper also received a strong blow to the back. At this time, his partner recovered a little and again decided to raise the knife to attack. But before the blade could even cut through Chen Chu's skin, he was thrown aside. Chen Chu reacted faster again and attacked the kidnapper first, giving him a beating. The poor fellow flew back a few steps and seemed to have dislocated his chin. Suddenly, someone's hands caught the man from behind and prevented him from completely losing his balance. The young man who had been watching everything before now told his boss to take a rest and looked at the attacking young man. It turned out that this young man was a student of Yuwen, a martial arts master. Chen Chu also introduced himself as Luo Tuan's disciple in order to be on equal terms with his rival. In the countryside, somewhere near the sea, a battle between 2 martial arts students was taking place. The young bandit attacked Chen Chu with new strikes like Tolu's fist. But he didn't have time to make a single attack, as all of them were successfully prevented by Chen Chu, who intercepted his hands. Chen Chu also decided to use this as an opportunity to attack his opponent. But the enemy pressed his leg against his, not allowing him to move and using it as a support. The next moment, he hit Chen Chu on the head with his fist, causing Chen Chu to stutter. Falling but not landing on the ground, Chen Chu thought that this man's fighting style wasn't that bad either. The battle continued, and Chen Chu, without falling, took a stance for another attack. His opponent's eyes showed confusion as his attack barely damaged Chen Chu at all. The next moment, the enemy was launched into the air by a kick that Chen Chu had taught his father. The poor guy slid his back across the floor of this building, tearing off his skin in some places. Lying on the floor, he thought that this was all very interesting. The young man said that he did not expect to meet Luo Tuan's disciple when he came down from the mountain. Chen Chu interrupted his new acquaintance's monologue with a phrase about what a shame it was. Wiping the blood from his mouth, his opponent looked at him, asking what he meant. And Chen Chu continued to say that he never thought that the thug would have a fist technique. According to him, it was a shame that Yu Wen's disciple had taken the crooked path. The man raised his head and looked at Chen Chu, about to say something. He laughed and said that Chen Chu was too arrogant because he was also a disciple. Getting ready to attack again, the enemy said that he simply understood the simple truth that in this world either he drowns or is drowned. Chen Chu noticed that the opponent's fingers were rapidly approaching his eyes and he needed to act. So with just one kick, he sent his enemy flying free again, screaming. The young man landed right on his face, breaking the bridge of his nose and not understanding how he even got to that point. Chen Chu thought that the battle between martial arts disciples was dangerous because it required a lot of strength. It seemed as if the boy's strength and spirit far exceeded his own. But Chen Chu couldn't control himself, no matter how much of a bastard they were. It was impossible to treat people like that. Thinking that he would deal with it later, Chen Chu remembered that there was still a girl sitting somewhere under the wall. He approached her and removed the ropes from the poor girl. She immediately pounced on Chen Chu with hugs and thanked him immensely for saving her. Chen Chu handed the girl the phone and told her that she could call the police as soon as he left. He also asked her to say that she did not see his face if they asked about him. Still with undisguised gratitude in her eyes, the girl agreed not to tell the police about him. Finally, 10 minutes later, an armed police squad was already on the scene. They entered the building with weapons and shouted at everyone not to move and to raise their hands. But when the police saw what happened inside the building, they were perplexed, because in front of them was only a fragile young girl, covering her face with her hands from the light. The attackers, who were also unconscious, were scattered across the floor of the building. A few moments later, police officer Guan Qing came to the chief with the information he requested. She said they were able to find footprints on the broken door, which was reported to have been kicked in with tremendous force. 2 of the kidnappers died immediately, and the third fell into a coma after suffering a concussion. The deputy chief did not believe that this was possible, because the greatest force that the Boxing King could squeeze out of himself was even less. The girl who came with the report said that the strength was indeed not human, but the oddities did not end there. Suddenly there was a thunderstorm in the sky, and several bolts of lightning fell on the city. The approaching storm interrupted the girl's report of the strange things. At the same time, Chen Chu's car parked somewhere near the coast. He looked out the window meaningfully, trying to find anything suspicious with his gaze. There on the shore, several people were talking about how their boss had just received money, but had already spent it on a woman. And the man asked if his subordinate knew who this woman was, and also assured everyone that with her money would no longer be a hindrance for them. The two men accompanying him were overcome with joy at the fact that they would finally live. One of the men had already sorted out the delivery of the goods and rented an elite office building for accommodation, as the boss had requested. He said that he also asked to find the most beautiful secretaries for them, so that he would not be disappointed. The boss said that thanks to his underwater breathing, he was still alive, and as soon as they found the location of the sunken ship, they would pull out all the treasures. The man smiled slyly and said that soon they would have all the money in the world in their hands. But suddenly, a beam of light from the headlights of a car appeared from the bushes behind. The boss of the whole gang immediately shouted, asking who was here. He did not expect that there was anyone else here. Chen appeared from behind a tree somewhere very close and said that he had seen many bastards, but these ones stood out. The man was about to rush into battle, swinging his weapon and saying that daredevils like him do not live long. But Chen did not approach him in response, but simply raised his foot and stomped loudly on the ground. The movement caused the approaching intruder to fly into the air as the ground rippled beneath his feet. And a little after that, Chen raised his fist to attack the enemy directly. With one blow, he slammed the man into a nearby tree and he hit his back painfully. The man's subordinates decided it was time to run away because their boss was clearly losing. They hadn't managed to get far when a pair of sharp blows pierced their bodies with pain. Chen turned around and looked towards that strange intruder. The young man turned to the boss of this gang and told him to look him in the eyes. He activated his ability and was about to test his mind control ability. The young man asked the name of this bandit and what he was doing there, and he simply could not resist and answered. He said his name was Zhang Changshu. He was a smuggler, and a month ago he learned to breathe underwater. The man gave away everything about himself. He even said that he raids sunken ships in the ocean and exchanges the loot for money. After a few seconds, Chen had heard enough, so he released his control over the mind of this criminal element. He immediately fell to the ground and screamed in pain from his arm, and Chen told him that he had broken it himself. The young man couldn't help but be glad that the mind control had affected his judgment as well. Chen ordered the criminal to rest and return to the ship, waiting for him there. The young man thought that his ability was excellent, and Changshu, unlike his colleagues, resisted more. A few minutes later, they all reached the ship, the people on which were perplexed. One of them directly asked Changshu who was with him, and he introduced Chen as his boss. He also said to prepare a contract for the transfer of this vessel to the possession of his newly minted boss. Only smart and quick people worked on this ship, because the contract was ready in just a few minutes. Chen turned to a man with glasses and told him to wait for him in the office tomorrow, and then sent Changshu to the hospital. The next day, Chen returned to his iguana again, thinking that the ocean was a great place for an endless supply of food. The young man also worked on himself in the gym every day because he could not rely only on the clone to become stronger. He understood perfectly well that he himself needed to train to become stronger. This is how his days passed, training and consuming new food in the form of an iguana. Now Chen even had a decent job, just like in a fairy tale with the snap of his fingers. As Chen walked out of the business center, he thought that the transfer process had been completed, and he had not gone outside for the whole day, having gained 90 evolution points. During that day, he learned that he wasn't the only one with superpowers and he needed to become stronger, especially when he knew what was waiting in the ocean. Meanwhile, in the ocean, members of his new group were calmly fishing and talking about how there had been almost no fish lately. They were sailing on a ship and talking about how there must probably be some kind of shark nearby. Meanwhile, under the water there really were sharks, but these sharks were not vicious. Every now and then, they tried to attack a small-looking iguana that swam nearby. But no matter how hard these sharks tried, everything always ended the same way. As soon as the huge shark grabbed the iguana in its teeth, it slipped out of its grip. And then the iguana pounced on the shark, eating the tender meat and receiving new evolution points. Chen heard the system notification that his clone was now ready to evolve, but now he was being given a choice. He confirmed his readiness for evolution, and the lizard again became covered in cracks all over his thick skin and grimaced in pain. Meanwhile, Chen who had been in the gym the entire time, was also writhing in pain on the floor. When the evolution was completed, the young man thought that he had finally broken through, and his physique was now superior to that of a human. He reread the statistics again, which had improved since last time, and thought that it was because his numbers were too low last time. He now had a new ability of affinity with water, and the iguana became even larger than it was and also increased in strength. Now he could swim at speeds of up to 70 kilometers per hour, which was faster than a ship. The new job was quite easy for Chen He kept asking about the treasures, and then said that they would find them themselves. They mostly explored the shallow waters of the routes used by the two countries, but the deep waters were still full of ships. Now, after evolution, he could breathe underwater longer and his sense of smell improved, so he could sense everything within 20 kilometers. Chen Chu stretched in his chair and thought that the point of raising a clone was to enjoy life. And so his days passed one after another. Only at 11 o'clock he remembered that it was time to eat. Meanwhile, on one of the city streets, a woman was sitting, looking a little strange. On one of the streets stood Chen Chu with a very small crowd of people around him. Chen thought that he only had 20,000 left at the moment, but he would soon take over Zhan's company. Chen thought he was about to finally find out what it was like to be rich. But then the boy suddenly turned around. The guy's gaze fell on the girl who was lying unconscious on the floor and two men were towering over her. One of the men exclaimed, asking why Chen was looking at them. He was about to answer, but Chen stopped, realizing that his passion for martial arts was awakening, so while there was no danger, there was no point in interfering. One of the men picked up the crowbar and asked what Chen meant. The other replied that if Chu left, they would pretend they hadn't seen him. But the brunette was not going to retreat, only slightly bowing his head, and a flame immediately flared up behind him. A huge fiery lion silhouette hovered in the air, slowly approaching Chen's opponents. The brunette clenched his fists tighter, and at the same time the flame behind him flared up even brighter than before. One of the men compared Chen to some kind of wild animal, and the second suggested that they leave quickly. The blonde, who had been lying by the pole, suddenly laughed loudly and asked if those idiots were really that scared. Chen Chu simply waved his hand in response and frowned, realizing that the girl was clearly not herself. The hooded man bit his lip, thinking that you don't meet a lady like that every day. And at that very moment, the hooded guy's friend rushed at Chen, exclaiming that he was just an overconfident simpleton. Chen Chu decided not to use his firepower, and so he only looked at the two silhouettes with knives in front of him. But then the man suddenly jumped high into the sky and stretched his arm forward, directing the air currents. And just a moment later, Chen abruptly threw the two men away, forcing them to roll through a fiery funnel. Chen used only 10% of his power because he knew that otherwise he would have turned those people into mush. Looking at the two silhouettes that were trying to crawl away from the battle site, Chen decided to let them go for the first time. And just a moment later, the blonde laughed again and shook her head, saying that Chen had incredible strength. And Chen only frowned more in response, realizing that the girl was most likely on drugs. Chen started calling the police, saying he found a strange and drunk woman near a bar. She started hugging him, saying that he could have fun without the police. But Chen only pushed the girl away, and a few minutes later the police arrived. The blonde smiled cheerfully as she watched Chen give his statement while she was led to the police car. Then Chen Chu looked away thoughtfully, realizing that he had one less thing to do. Chen knew it was time to take control of Iguana and reclaim the ship. At the same time, the lizard was searching the seabed for something that it should find with its sixth sense. And then the lizard suddenly found gold bars, realizing that she was incredibly lucky. And then the lizard ordered the bespectacled man to send the ship 3 kilometers to the east, and he immediately carried out the order. One man asked if anyone other than Boss Zhang could breathe underwater. Another replied that they shouldn't pry into other people's secrets. At the same time, the lizard's tail gently touched the gold bars that lay in the box. And then the monster was told that they had discovered something. The lizard immediately tensed up. The lizard swam on, realizing that it looked like metal. And the bespectacled man said that they were already returning. The lizard barely touched the dark stone, realizing that it was a durable material, similar to a special alloy. The lizard then lifted the stone into the water, realizing that it was worth studying it carefully. But then the lizard suddenly turned around, noticing a huge snow-white monster behind it. The monster put the lizard in its mouth, which did not understand who the monster thought he was, because he was better than him in strength and defense. And after just a few moments, only a few snow-white bones remained in the water, sinking down. Having gnawed the monster's skeleton, the lizard swam on, realizing that the fish was very tasty. A couple of hours later, Chen found himself on a deserted night beach to test his strength. After all, the reefs had eroded and become very hard. Chen understood that he absorbed most of the force of the blow, and his body recovered easily, so he felt almost no pain. Hitting the rocks again, Chen reflected on how his physique had surpassed 200 after evolution. Chen Chu hadn't tested his strength yet, but the stone was clearly at least a ton in weight. He figured he could easily pierce a person through and through. And just a moment later, Chen easily smashed the huge stone into small pieces. Chen knew that the punching bag at home was not strong enough, but if someone filmed him training in the gym and posted it, there would be a lot of problems later. Chen knew, lying on the sand, that only there would he be able to train. And then he turned his attention to his regeneration. But then the brunette's gaze fell on the lizard, which placed a black stone on the sand after emerging from the water. Meeting the lizard's gaze, Chen thought that at first glance, there was nothing special about this ore. Chen thought that the metal was heavy but very brittle, so it would make a good material for weapons. But with his skills, it was unlikely to be possible. Then Chen looked away, deciding that he would be better off focusing on the gold he had found. Chen Chu approached the man and asked where everyone was. He exclaimed that they had succeeded and that the staff was on the ship. Chen picked up a gold bar and his employee asked how much money they had collected. Chen squeezed the ingot and said that there was no marking on them, which meant they were minted differently and therefore they would not be able to sell them. After some time, the guy saw the city center before his eyes, where life was in full swing. Chen asked the girl at the counter if they accepted gold. She asked if the guy had earrings or rings. Chen smiled kindly in response and showed a bag of gold bars, saying that he wanted to sell them. In response, the brown-eyed girl smiled awkwardly, saying that she should introduce Chen to the owner. And then a man approached them and asked if he could find out Chen's name and how much gold he wanted to sell. The guy introduced himself and smiled again, pointing to the bag and saying that he wanted to sell everything. The owner bowed in response, saying that it would take time to verify the authenticity of the gold, so Chen should wait. Chen decided not to object and simply waited for his money, sitting on a comfortable sofa. The owner said the bars weighed 11,000 grams and they offered him 400 yuan per gram. The guy now had about 5 million in his account. Sitting at the car, Chen thought about how he had easily earned millions while his peers were still studying. Then Chen barely exhaled and grinned, thinking that all this even sounded incredible. But then Chen decided that he would first buy himself a car because the bumpy roads were terrible to drive on. After some time, Chen found himself in a luxury car showroom where everything seemed to be shining. A store employee stood next to Chen, looking at the cars around them. A few moments later, 2 more visitors came in, and the employee immediately bowed respectfully. The new clients turned out to be a young couple, which Chen was very surprised by, looking at the girl's silhouette. Chen recalled that this girl was his ex, whom he had previously tried to please in everything, but she was chasing money, having fun with rich people. The girl hugged her boyfriend and said that Chen was a loser who used to be his lover. He asked what this poor idiot was doing in the car dealership. The man behind Chen immediately became furious and asked how they dared to talk about him like that, but Chu stopped him. The girl said that it was stupid to forbid him from telling the truth to his face, because Chen couldn't even pay for his own education. The girl approached the red car and exclaimed that she wanted it. The guy exclaimed irritably that they should check everything first. The guy understood that he needed money to impress women, but he was not yet ready to buy such expensive cars. Meanwhile, Chen Chu stood in front of the white car, realizing that he should take it. The employee said that such a car would cost 2 million yuan. The guy's ex immediately turned around. Noticing their gazes, Chen Chu suddenly chuckled and said that he would pay everything in cash. The ex blushed, not understanding why Chen was willing to pay for such an expensive car. The girl's boyfriend said that Chen was just bluffing. The girl reminded him that previously Chu could only afford noodles for weeks. This couple couldn't understand how a poor student could afford to buy a premium car. The girl's boyfriend smiled mockingly, asking her to stop putting on a show since the payment wouldn't go through anyway. The guy with glasses asked what would happen if the payment went through. The other guy said that he would then call Chen daddy. The girl also smiled mockingly and quietly said that it was really just a bluff. But then an employee approached Chen and said the car was now his. The red-haired girl's boyfriend couldn't understand where he got all that money from. She was surprised and embarrassed. The bespectacled man grabbed the guy by the shirt, saying that he would now have to call the boss daddy. But Chen just waved his hand and said that they shouldn't waste their time on those people. The bespectacled man turned around and said that the boss was too kind to them because if he were in his place, he would have beaten both of their faces. The red-haired girl continued to watch her ex, and the other guy immediately covered his face in shame. The girl rushed after her ex's car, asking him to listen to her. The employee said that she had missed a chance for a better life, but that's the nature of people. After some time, Chen Chu managed to find himself in the best restaurant in the city. Chen Chu smiled and walked confidently into the restaurant while everyone present bowed to him. The waitress asked Chen what he wanted to order. He ordered Boston lobster and Kamchatka crab. Turning the menu page, Chen thought that it was expensive, but worth it. And then there were 2 girls in bras next to Chen, who were entertaining the guy while he ate. Chen thought that after the pile of dishes eaten by Iguana, it was time to enjoy himself. And then the guy turned his gaze to the screen of his phone, carefully reading the incoming messages. The supervisor reminded them that classes would start in a week. and Chen was surprised that he hadn't been expelled yet. Chen sprawled out on the couch, realizing that there was little time left, so he needed to earn evolution points quickly. The swordfish was considered the fastest among the others, as it could reach speeds of up to 90 kilometers per hour, but the lizard was faster. Having pierced the fish's body with his teeth, the lizard thought that after he had eaten his fill, he would go on a treasure hunt. Having swum further, Iguana realized that he could now identify all objects within a radius of 10 kilometers. The iguana explored the seabed but did not find a single sunken ship, even though several days of searching had already passed. The lizard wondered if there were some secret supernatural organizations under the control of the government. At the same time, Chen stood in front of the tall buildings, and next to him was his friend. Chen knew that Zhang had not visited the company since it became poet, but the location for the office was not bad. After a while, they finally entered the building, and the bespectacled man ordered Xiaoning to call everyone to the boss's office. Most of the workers immediately followed his advice and quickly arrived at the office. Chen was already sitting at the table when a man introduced him as the new boss. The girls immediately noticed him, considering Chen an ambitious and handsome young man. Chen was introduced to Ning Naixing, who worked as a receptionist. She greeted him shyly. The pink-haired girl placed the cup of coffee on Chen's desk, smiling softly. The man introduced her as Chen's personal assistant named Su Len, but Chen didn't pay any attention to her. After reading the documents, the brunette thought that the company had proven itself well, and its monthly maintenance costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Chen smiled and asked everyone to return to their duties, and Zhang Shu was to take care of the ship. Chen leaned down, realizing that the mind control effect was stable, but not as reliable as he would like. Looking out the window, Chen thought that he was simply using the clone to hunt, and therefore, without doing anything, he was becoming stronger. Then the man just smiled slightly and drank his coffee, realizing that this was a wonderful feeling. At the same time, the monster began to attack some fish in the water again, tearing them to pieces. The iguana could cut through the bodies of underwater monsters and fish with just one blow. The lizard chased the fish, realizing that if it weren't for the external force field, he could have suffered. And the number of ferocious mutated creatures was growing. The lizard then began to devour the head of the mutated fish, realizing that this victim was different from the others. Then Chen's body flashed red and his muscles and bones became stronger. Even the power increased tenfold. And at that very moment, the lizard swam away from the fish's corpse, hoping that there was only one such creature. At that time, a female employee sitting in the main office asked Len if their boss had a girlfriend. Su Len asked if the girl really wanted to hit on the boss. In response, she became embarrassed and covered her cheeks with her hands. And at that very moment, a certain man came into their main office and asked if they had finished. Chen walked out from behind the door, having heard the entire conversation, but deciding to pretend he hadn't heard anything to avoid any awkwardness. Chen straightened his tie and suggested that they all go out to dinner together since they had worked so hard all day. And after some time, Chen brought all the girls to the restaurant, and they were talking about the guy's generosity. The bill came to 50,000, and Chen decided to pay for the entire dinner himself. The girls wondered if the boss was throwing money around like that. Then who were his parents? Chen said he had some business to do that evening, but he would drive everyone home after dinner. The girls thanked him. And already at night, the boy found himself on the beach again, hitting stones. He thought that the sea breeze calmed him down. During this time, Chen did not stop his training, so his physique and strength are better than that of an ordinary person. But the stronger Chen became, the harder it was for him to hold back, so he had to train harder. But then, the guy's gaze suddenly fell on a boat that had risen into the water not far from him. A man on the beach asked if the other guy didn't trust him. The guy exclaimed to the boss that money first, then goods. Chen hid behind a rock, realizing that those men most likely had weapons, so he needed to be careful. The men began shaking hands, saying that this was an excellent product, and they looked forward to further cooperation. The blonde asked Chi to be careful because things were going badly. He replied that even if the deal fell through, no one would know. And a few moments later, the silhouette of a man appeared in the sky, pushing off from the trees. Chen managed to knock out two men with just one blow without them even having time to realize anything. The blonde immediately recoiled in fear, sharply grabbing the weapon in his pocket. When Chen approached him, the blonde immediately pointed the barrel of the gun at him, trembling all over. But Chen Chu managed to easily hit the blonde man, sending his body flying back several meters. Chen Chu stood in the middle of the corpses of men, next to which lay a certain black suitcase. Chen understood that those people had lost their humanity, and so by getting rid of them, he was doing the world a favor. Then Chen Chu suddenly headed towards the boat, which had already sailed far away. The lizard then pushed a small boat which was quickly rushing along the reservoir. Just moments later, the boat was broken in two, forcing the men to jump overboard. All crew members began to slowly approach the ocean floor, following the wreckage of the boat. The lizard swam past them, carefully watching each member of the crew. But the men managed to notice the monster and quickly surfaced, swimming to the shore and begging for help. One man flew into the air and begged his boss for help, but he only winced. And the lizard ate the man. The boss said that they won't be able to escape, so it's worth checking whether the monster will dodge a bullet. And then, just a moment later, the boss pointed his gun at the sky and fired. The bullet almost hit the monster's eye, but the boss missed. The monster froze in surprise for a moment, and then the boss's body began to shake violently from fear and horror, because he did not understand what was happening. The iguana immediately pounced on the brunette, opening its mouth wide and growling loudly. And just a moment later, the boss had already disappeared into the depths of the water as the iguana pulled him along. Within moments, Iguana grabbed the black box and swam towards the shore, ignoring the corpses behind her. Meanwhile, in Chen's room, huge wads of money were lying on the bed. Chen had already calculated that he had 3 million. He thought that when you hold cash in your hands, you understand the scale of what you have earned. The next morning at the cafe, many men turned to look at Len and said that she was beautiful. The girl put a folder of documents on Chen's desk and asked him to sign. The men turned around in surprise, thinking that the girl's boss was still very young. Chen said that they would return to the office soon, and that Lan should notify him of the time of each meeting. When Chen stood up, the other men thought he was a mountain of muscle. After a while, a voice came from the boss's door advising them to think through every step, and then a promotion would await them. Chen told employees that as long as the company's productivity grew, they would receive bonuses. But a voice came from Chen's phone saying that he had one last day left to apply to the university. Grabbing his phone abruptly, Chen apologized and told his colleagues that he had to go. Chen said he had urgent business at the university. The staff could leave early, and Sue would take care of corporate matters in the meantime. The girls began to whisper, surprised that Chen was still studying and not just a rich heir. When Chen Chu got out of the expensive car sometime later, he immediately attracted a lot of attention. People around were whispering, not understanding where Chen got a car that cost more than 2 million. Meanwhile, the university forum was discussing how a rich, tall guy in an expensive car had appeared out of nowhere. The blonde sat on the bed and looked closely at Chen's photo, deciding that he looked familiar. The girl remembered the day when Chen protected her from 2 men. The blonde thought that the guy's eyes were like a whole universe. They wrote on the forum that this was not a newbie at all, but a second-year student of the economics department. The blonde bit her lip and whispered that it turned out that Chen was studying with her. Meanwhile, Chen was walking in the park thinking that his strength was growing quickly. He was learning new techniques. Smiling, Chen thought that now he could easily kill a person with one blow. Chen decided to work on his strength and control on his own so as not to hurt anyone. After some time, Chen approached the girl and said that he would like to order about 100 tons of steel containers. The girl replied that she would contact the sales manager, and then she took Chen to the VIP lounge. The manager shook Chen's hand, asking what kind of steel he needed. He gave the required parameters with columns. The manager said that the total tons would be 200 tons, and the estimated cost would be about 70,000. And then Chen just extended his hand and said that they could sign the contract because everything was fine. The next morning, Chen was finally shown the warehouse, which was simply enormous. Chen, left alone, thought that a new transformation was just around the corner, but there was still a long way to go. Chen decided that once the steel column was installed, he would start training. Chen thought that the maximum number of evolution points per day was 100. And compared to the lizard, he had achieved nothing. And the police took the bodies out of the water, saying that he owned the bar and cut off the hand. They said that all 3 were killed within a minute by one person. But then, suddenly, the voice came over the radio again, saying that another body had been found. Len said that they didn't have any new work, so they should give them some kind of assignment. Chen laughed and said that it was like fishing. You have to wait for the fish to bite. But Lang thought that at this rate, they might go bankrupt. Suddenly, a voice said that someone wanted to discuss the terms of the deal with the boss. Len wondered if this was the fishing trip. The man came in and asked where Zhang was, and Chen replied that the staff and Zhang himself were now under his command. Wang Tian introduced himself and laughed, saying that it was impressive. Chen invited him to sit down. Lang immediately frowned and said that she would make tea for the boss. He asked her to do it faster. Wang Tian said that he had a sunken ship that was worth at least tens of millions. Wang said he would take 70% and Chen 30%, because that was the practice in companies. The guy responded by advising Tian to contact others. Wang asked Chen what he would propose. He said he would only agree to an equal division of the money. Wang frowned in response, thinking that in their days the law was strict, so this was his only chance. Chen said that he would definitely raise the ship, because he had his own methods and Wang could verify this. And then the guy shook Chen's hand, saying that it was a pleasure to deal with him, and therefore he agreed to such conditions. At the same time, the police were scratching their heads and could not understand who could have such huge fangs. The man opened his eyes in fear and muttered that this was some kind of anomaly. At the same time, the man decided to send a message about the murder of 4 guys in the water. Len stood behind her boss, awkwardly asking why she needed this column. Chen smiled and said that the pillar stabilizes water flows and keeps aquatic creatures at bay. Chen suddenly took note of his bill, realizing that it was time for him to cut back. And after some time, a huge, luxurious white car arrived at the apartment. Len thanked Chen for giving her a ride and then suggested that he stop by her house for some water. He said he had some other things to do. Len watched the car go, not understanding how she could have said such a stupid thing. The girl pressed her hand to her mouth, realizing that this was not the best excuse to call him over. Chen thought that he had already started to accidentally break the sticks, so it was time to train in controlling his strength. The brunette began to hit the stone again when some time had passed and the beach was empty. Chen barely pressed his palm to the stone, thinking that he should hone his skills further. Chen could now feel everything, even the flapping of a wing or the breath of wind that happened within a radius of 30 kilometers. A couple of days later, the lizard continued to hunt underwater, increasing its evolution points. First, Iguana found a mutated fish with red eyes and then noticed Van's ship. Chen, on the phone, asked when they could start. He was told the deal was only possible that evening. Chen, after ending the call, remembered that after long training, he had increased his strength and improved his aura. After a while, the man said to Chen, looking into the water, that something was 200 meters to the left of his ship, at a depth of 800 meters. The iguana, meanwhile, swam further and further underwater, without even feeling the pressure. The iguana looked at the indicated coordinates, but found only a small gorge there. Chen told his partner that there was nothing at depth. The latter asked in bewilderment how he had checked so quickly. The man looked at the radio in bewilderment and wondered how Chen had checked such a large area in 20 minutes. A man told the boss that the location had not changed, so it was worth moving to the east. The iguana immediately changed its location and headed towards the specified coordinates. Swimming into the distance, the lizard could easily follow everything that was happening around it. Looking into the distance, the lizard suddenly grinned, happy about the discovery it had finally made. And after some time, Chen's partner's assistants pulled a huge black box out of the water. Having retrieved the treasure, the boss was informed that its estimated value was around 30 million, and that selling it privately could almost double the amount. Chen, who was still in contact with his boss, heard this too. He said he would just take his share of the money. A couple of days later, the boss said that they had a total of 23 million, and then added that he would contact Chen again later. Chen placed his hand on the stack of money, realizing that even though the financial problem was solved, he still had to train until the bullets and grenades no longer affected him. Li Tian introduced himself as Chen Chu, saying that he was the deputy general manager of Tianhong Company and also a friend of Wang. He said that he would like to offer the young man cooperation, but Chen Chu replied that it would be better for them to discuss everything tomorrow. Then the secretary entered the office and informed Mr. Li that she had the boss's statement in her hands. Thinking that they really should meet tomorrow, Li Tian left the office. The girl sitting in the office looked at Li Tian's retreating figure and said that he was very young. According to one of them, he had the same surname as Chairman Tianhong, so perhaps they were related. The girls were talking about how amazing it was, and how good it must have been to date someone like that. At this time, Chen Chu was rejoicing, thinking that even the son of the richest man was interested in sunken ships. Then he went back into his amphibian form and thought that he had just caught a large, expensive fish in the sea. Moreover, he caught not just one fish, but 2, and now he was storing them in a warehouse. The slaves were worth over $10 million, and their meat didn't taste all that special. Chen Chu stood in front of a huge container of ice and fish, and didn't understand why people were willing to pay so much money for it. The next day, during another training session, Chen Chu was informed that young Master Li had been waiting for him for a long time. Indeed, the rich man's expensive-looking yellow car had been parked outside the company's office for several minutes. Chen Chu and young Master Li were discussing the fact that one of them had the exact location of the sunken ship. Chen Chu became interested in the proposal and offered the young man to split their spoils in half. Judging by the way this young gentleman agreed to everything, He was not chasing the treasures on board at all. Chen Chu decided to ask if this young man knew anyone who ran a high-class seafood restaurant. Hearing that Chen Chu had expensive fish, Li became interested and said that he had a couple of contacts. And a few hours after this dialogue, the inspired restaurant owner was already jumping to the warehouse. The appraisers looked at the fish in the ice and said that it was of excellent quality, so it had to be taken. The smiling man was even more pleased that the rumors were true, so he offered 7 million for the fish. One of the subordinates looked at Chen Chu and was surprised that he sold just one fish for such a huge amount of money. As soon as this deal was completed, Chen Chu and his secretary immediately headed to the shopping mall. The young man said that they had had a great catch today, so it was worth spending some money. Seeing this man buying up new products from leading brands, the girl was surprised at how easily he spent money. Returning to the warehouse, which was also a temporary base, Chen Chu and his secretary entered the premises. The girl couldn't stop thinking about the fact that he bought so many expensive things that he clearly spent more than 1 million. Chen Chu casually announced that he wanted to buy a villa and needed to find something around 30 million yuan. The girl listened to his request and said that she understood everything and was ready to start looking for a villa. After finishing his business, Chen Chu thought that he wished he was strong enough to tear submarines apart. But his pet already looked quite impressive, so most likely he could achieve what he wanted soon. As he was swimming through another gorge, it seemed to the young man that there was something at the bottom. This something seemed strange to him, so he decided to swim away from here for now. After swimming a little further, a giant crab of paranormal size appeared before Chen Chu's eyes. The young man in the amphibian uniform immediately swung his paw at him, thinking that the poor guy had messed with the wrong guy. But the crab didn't die from one blow, which made Chen Chu think that he was stronger than those little fish. The amphibian frowned as she looked at the crab, thinking that he would have to put in a little effort. His next attack proved fatal for the crab as it was thrown back several dozen meters. The only problem was that it would be impossible to eat this crab in one go, no matter how hard you tried. After returning to his human body, Chen Chu sat down at his laptop and began reading a report on the unusual marine phenomena over the past few years. Now, in addition to the giant fish, there were also crabs, which meant that something was clearly wrong here. Headlines appeared on the screen about an M-class nuclear submarine missing in action at a depth of 600 meters in the ocean. Although she was initially reported to have been attacked by a giant monster, the second edit stated that she had simply collided with an iceberg. Chen Chu thought that all this had happened in just a couple of years, and it seemed like all the cases were connected. While Chen Chu's pet was getting points for eating the crab, something else was lurking in one of the caves. The amphibian grew in size again, which couldn't help but surprise Chen Chu. The young man thought that his physical condition had increased again, and that his bones and muscles felt different. Now even bullets could only scratch him, and his defense and reaction speed were beyond human capabilities. The next day, the young man went to the Xinhua bookstore and leafed through the books, trying to find something. This world was not as simple as it seemed before, so reading and learning was always useful. The two girls who were watching Chen Chu were talking about how they needed to ask for his contact information. At this time, Chen Chu was busy thinking that one could only advance through training. After finishing choosing books, he returned to his training room, where he again hit the punching bag. Suddenly, his phone rang, causing the young man to tear himself away from his work. His employees called to announce their arrival. Chen Chu asked to send him their location. They told him on the phone that they had found gold and some broken porcelain. And then the subordinate also told him that if Chen Chu found the black box, then everything else on the destroyed ship would become Chen Chu's property. The young man thought that the gold alone would cost 20 million. So what kind of precious box was this? After opening the box, Chen Chu realized that it was just a pile of black mud, and it was unclear what his subordinate was going to do with it. After bringing the box to dry land and delivering it to the recipient, Chen Chu left, and the man opened the box containing the mud. Seeing that there was nothing there but dirt, he grabbed his head and screamed something about his elixirs. At the same time, several policemen surrounded the body of some unfortunate person. One of them thought that all the killer's victims were bandits, without families, but physically strong. The senior police officer asked So Jun to write a report and shut down all the entertainment venues in the city. A little later in the night, another unfortunate victim was found, whose blood was now being drunk by the killer. The policeman, having received a call about the incident, was perplexed because 4 more people had been killed. Chen Chu was training at this time, happy that he had already made great progress in Baji Qiong and Xinyi Qiwan. He received a new martial arts technique and decided to call it the explosive fist. The next day, as soon as the sun rose, a group of people already went fishing. The sailor was happy that he had finally caught a fish after such a long chase after the school. But his joy did not last long because his comrade reported to him that a hole had formed in the center of the net and the fish were escaping. At this time, underwater, the amphibian was thinking about how dozens of fish could be caught in one bite. The sailors pulled a completely torn net out of the water without any fish and did not understand what kind of monster or divine creature could have done this. A few hours later, Chen received an invitation to a beautiful place from Mr. Lieutenant. The place turned out to be the elegant Mengluo Pavilion, which had not yet been closed by order of the police. At the entrance, people were greeted by a beautiful, lovely girl, an employee of the establishment. The man accompanying Chen asked if anyone had reserved the Yunxiao Hall. Eventually, the men moved into the hall to eat and enjoy the show. It didn't matter that the king neglected his duties because such places were ideal for immersing oneself in the atmosphere. After the get-together, Chen was returning home in his car through some forest. He felt uncomfortable because of the aura and thought that someone was on his tail. The young man thought that he felt the same way as he did that night when he was chased by the giant lizard. But after a few seconds, the pursuer showed up. It was just a couple of people offering him a competition. All that was left to do was to hiss and leave the scene of the incident as quickly as possible. Chen car flew off the slope and drove in a different direction from those people, as the youth still felt that aura somewhere nearby. Two people said that that turn was crazy. Was Chen trying to kill himself? The young man thought that at such a speed even faster cars could not catch up, but that aura still haunted him. Thinking that he wouldn't be able to figure everything out so quickly, Chen came to the seashore. He felt someone's presence and told that person to come out. A girl appeared from behind a tree. She said she was just swimming in the sea and someone took her clothes and then asked them to give her something to put on. But Chen at this time had already attacked the strange girl without giving her a second to think. The young man's face immediately showed bewilderment at what he saw in front of him after he had carried out a successful attack. A cloud of dust rose, but it was not the most frightening thing around now. That girl turned out to be some kind of strange monster with 4 arms and skin the color of a dead person. She introduced herself as Yin Xiao and said that she was a more perfect version of a human. The girl clearly intended to eat Chen underestimating his fighting power, and he was already preparing to defend himself. He swung again while the girl was talking about how this would be enough for her to complete the first stage of evolution. But Chen said that since she wanted to eat him so badly, he would see if she could deserve it. As a result, with one blow, he managed to neutralize his opponent, and she was left lying on the ground in confusion. But then, the creature in the form of a girl suddenly disappeared from the place where Chen was hitting. He hit the trees around him, and it seemed to cause the creature some pain. Therefore, the young man realized that it could merge with tree roots and rocks, but every time he attacked its weak points, the aura would weaken. Within moments, not a single intact tree remained at the site of the battle. Chen stood over the body of the monster, motionless and tired from the long battle. He voiced all his assumptions about the monster's abilities and asked her to answer a few of his questions. The monster asked if he looked like someone who was afraid of death, and then spoke of the beauty of the moon, intending to die quietly. The monster said that if he had only 1 month, he could complete the transformation. As the monster crumbled into dust, he spoke of his regrets about encountering Chen in an ordinary old city. The system announced that Chen had killed the seducer and received 10 attribute points. The young man thought that he already had extraordinary powers, and the iguana should soon have them too. This prospect could not fail to please Chen. He could already vividly imagine how his little iguana would become a real Godzilla. The young man returned to the warehouse closer to the morning since the journey took a little longer. He tried to find some information on the internet about seducers, but the search only yielded some kind of obscenity. And then, having come across the article, the young man realized that someone had blocked all the details. But in the end, he decided to return to searching for information again when his power increased. He opened the system window and decided to upgrade his lightning skill. After amplifying it, the system gave him a finger version of lightning and he thanked it for it. The next moment, he decided to try to apply his new ability in practice. And it was impressive, because now in the form of an iguana, he could easily strike his opponents with lightning. He killed another mutated sea beast and received 980 evolution points. The iguana now had lightning mastery, and it was several times greater than his own. At the same time, at the airport in another city, the police were meeting with someone important. Guande walked towards the agents from the Special Assignments Bureau, greeting them. One of the agents introduced himself as Huang Junfeng and shook Guangde's hand. The second one also introduced himself and immediately asked to get down to business and show them the body of the murdered man. Guandi also didn't want to delay, so he immediately led two special agents to the morgue. The man lying on the table died last night, and 4 days before that, 4 people mysteriously died on the same night. The special agent used some strange force and put his fingers on the deceased's forehead. Guande stared at him in confusion, and the agent continued his strange trick. The agent's colleague said that the aura had disappeared, so the man's killer was probably already dead. The killer of that very same killer was currently training again in his gym. He thought about how, not long ago, a girl had invited him to come up to her house for tea, but he had declined. The young man could not agree since his strength was so great that he could accidentally break everything in the poor girl's apartment. The next day, Chen Chu finally came to see the villa that his secretary had found for him. The seller told him that the full price was 34 million, but Chen Chu said that he would buy the villa for 25 million. At that very moment, as if inopportunely, Boss Chen Chu received a call and was informed that someone had been attacked by a monster. By this time, the two agents had finally been placed somewhere, and they went out onto the roof of the building to get some air. The men discussed the fact that no suspicious activity had been reported since the previous night. They came to the conclusion that it would be better for them to stay in this city for now and observe everything. The senior warned the junior agent that he should train to be prepared for the apocalypse. Still, the professor predicted that the next oscillation of space would be 10 times stronger than the previous one 20 years ago. The most important thing now was to improve their capabilities in anticipation of this in order to repay the country for caring for them. Underwater Chen Chu, in the form of an iguana, finally found something worthwhile, but accidentally broke a lot of porcelain. Having returned to his human form, he immediately went to see how much he could sell all his finds for. He did find gold, so it must have been worth at least a few million. He was pulled out of his thoughts by a scandal brewing between his secretary and some man. The man continued to stand his ground and became angrier and ruder with each passing second. One of the cafe visitors saw this and stood up for the poor girl. Chen Chu also decided to intervene in the squabble, saying that he had never seen such an arrogant guy as this man. He just laughed and said that if Chen Chu was unhappy with something, he could attack. The man apparently had not yet realized who he had just gotten into a fight with, so he looked quite confident. Chen Chu flexed his fists and asked the waitress if there were any surveillance cameras in their establishment. The girl immediately understood the hint and abruptly pulled the plug from the cameras out of the socket. The next moment she cried out that she was very annoyed that their cameras had suddenly broken. Chen Chu took this as nothing more than a call to action and smirked. The man who had been so confident before was now not happy to be involved in this. The next moment, one strong blow knocked the man out. Chen Chu waved his hand as if to brush off dust, but that cocky idiot couldn't move. The young man smiled and said that today someone wanted to get beaten up. Having finished with everything, he returned back to his warehouse. What Chu thought about the fact that human life did not even last a century, which was unfortunate. He dreamed of one day breaking down the boundaries between life and death and believed in his dreams. The next day, Chen Chu told one of the secretaries to start managing the company's finances. As soon as he mentioned double payment, the girl immediately agreed. She looked at Chen Chu as he walked away and asked where he was heading, to which he replied that he wanted to sell something. The young man got into his car and headed to another part of the city on this cloudless day. There, in the antique shop, he was greeted by a smiling man named Gao. Chen Chu asked Mr. Gao to help him determine how much the plate he brought cost. He opened the suitcase and asked to discuss everything with him upstairs. The shop owner thought that the plate smelled of the sea, so it looked like it had just been caught. In the office, the man said that the plate was not a fake and that it was part of a set. Chen Chu said that it was indeed a set when he first found this plate, but unfortunately, only this one survived. The antique genius offered to sell this plate to Chen Chu for 4.5 million. Outside, the secretary told Chen Chu that this man seemed the most honest of all the customers today. The young man agreed that the shop owner had indeed made the highest offer of the day. Maybe it was worth selling it to him. But Chen Chu remembered his gaze and still thought that something was wrong here. In fact, the shop owner was reporting to someone that he had found some kind of clue on the sunken ship. He held a plate in his hands and said that it had the seal they were chasing. His boss asked him to dig up more details about the young man who sold the plate. A few minutes later, Chen Chu's entire dossier was in the hands of two men who were clearly up to something. The antique dealer said that Chen Chu was an ordinary college student who suddenly came into money. Du Hong, who was the shopkeeper's boss, thought about whether he wanted to continue cooperating with Chen Chu. In the end, Chen Chu was indeed called again and asked to fill out a form. Already at home in bed, the young man thought that the deal had gone unexpectedly smoothly, but Boss Gao seemed to be hiding something. The next morning, Chen Chu was still thinking about it, but he decided to show up at the college and sort things out. The elevator arrived at the first floor where someone in a hood stood leaning against the wall. The hooded man pushed Chen Chu from behind as if he was going to attack or kill him. It turned out that he put a pistol to the young man's back and loudly ordered him not to move. Chen Chu didn't want to reveal his abilities at this time, so he followed the kidnapper onto the bus. He played his role on the home front, pretending to be scared and asking where they were dragging him. And they dragged him to a meeting with a certain person, well known in criminal circles. They reported to their boss that they had brought him in, and he was glad that he would finally get to see what kind of guy he was. Chen Chu suddenly stopped playing to the crowd and calmly asked why there were so few people there. Everyone around realized that Chen Chu was up to something, so the boss ordered everyone to grab their weapons. But Chen Chu managed to knock the pistols out of the hands of the unfortunate attacker even before they raised them. He sent several people flying freely around the room with sharp and powerful kicks. And then he grabbed a pistol, now having a good opportunity to threaten the kidnappers. Several people pointed guns at him and ordered him to put the gun down. The boss said that Chen Chu only had one gun, but he himself had two, and the young man was surrounded. But Chen Chu was clearly not afraid of this, so he informed the kidnappers that they were the ones in danger. Then, grinning, he asked them to tell him who was behind them. Despite the response of these guys, he was not going to spare them under any circumstances. So the first bullet went straight to the boss of this group and pierced him. The gang members immediately opened fire, saying that Chen Chu had run out of bullets. But the young man could easily deflect all the bullets flying at him with his bare hands, which is what he did. Clumps of terrifying red aura had accumulated around his body, protecting him from all sides. Seeing that the bullets were not affecting him, the attackers were perplexed. And while they were shouting that Chen Chu had become a monster, the young man was only proud that he had become stronger. Screams could be heard every now and then from a small room in the industrial zone. Chen Chu tried to extract information from his would-be kidnappers about who had sent them here. According to one of the men, it was the director of Longhua's company, Chan Du-hong. Taking the phone from one of the gang members he had killed, Chen Chu dialed the number. He called Du-hong's number and said that he wanted to see him in the evening. Immediately after the call, Chang Du-hong and the shopkeeper Gao began to consult about the fact that the price of 20 million was too high. Chen Chu no longer saw the need to use a car, so in the evening, he decided to walk to the meeting place. He ran as fast as he could while maintaining a straight face. They were already waiting for him at the Du-hong villa while he was moving at a speed of 120 meters per second. There, the shop owner and boss were already beginning to doubt that Chen Chu would come to them at all. The boss said he had 12 men with pistols and 24 loyal subordinates, so it was time to get to work. But suddenly, all of Chang Du-hong's subordinates began to look puzzled and ran off in all directions with the news. The lights went out, so it was necessary to urgently activate the backup power supply. The boss immediately sensed something was wrong and gave everyone the order to shoot anyone who came in, no matter who. But there was no one left to shoot, since most of his guards had fallen in the corridors. 2 bodyguards pointed their pistols at the door and waited for someone. The door slowly opened, making a strange creaking sound that seemed ominous in this situation. Boss Chan ordered everyone to open fire at that very second. But Chen Chu was faster, so he was able to deal with all the people threatening him before the first shot was fired. The boss looked puzzled and scared at the incredible speed at which Chen Chu moved. He addressed him as an awakened one and offered him 500 million. Chen Chu said that although the price sounded tempting, he couldn't leave the 2 of them alive after killing everyone else. Realizing the mistake he had made, Boss Chang looked at Chen Chu with a look of doom. He began to talk about how he once entered the territory and saw a man surrounded by fire who descended from the sky. The next day, a huge lake appeared in that place, and the authorities called it the Lake of the Sunken. Chen Chu thought that it was very fortunate that he didn't make a splash back then. The boss took out a gun and pointed it at Chen Chu, shouting something incoherent. But Chen Chu took this as a call to action, so he immediately attacked both the boss and shopkeeper Gao. After the chaos was over, police arrived at the villa and compiled a report on the 31 bodies found. The policeman guessed that the culprit was Chen Chu, who must also be involved in the deaths of people in the Red Forest. In his opinion, an unexpected turn had taken place here, and the next attack was inevitable. Although the policeman was going to give Chen Chu a chance, he was too angry. That same Chen Chu was finishing his dinner at the same time, not at all worried about the people killed today. He turned around and looked at the table where the empty plate stood, thinking that someone had snuck in here yesterday. In the form of an iguana, he hunted fish again, which had already become routine, and decided to check what was hiding at the bottom. It was becoming difficult for him to cope with the pressure, so Chen Chu decided to pause the research. Later in the evening, Chen Chu returned to the warehouse on the pier and decided to lay an ambush. He clearly heard the measured sounds of someone's footsteps and the rustling of a plastic bag. Looking out from around the corner, he thought that this time the strange man would not escape. With a smile on his face, Chen Chu jumped out of the ambush and immediately attacked that stranger. He didn't even look at where and who he was hitting. Chen Chu just decided to give someone a thrashing. But his opponent suddenly disappeared, causing Chen Chu to wonder what kind of power he had. As soon as the young man took a step to the side, the sire around him began to glow with blue flowers and began to float before his eyes. The system kindly informed him that his body was breaking apart under the influence of stretching energy. The man slowly walked into a new world that seemed to consist entirely of water. But as Chen walked further along the concrete walls, he discovered the silhouette of a monster standing in the doorway. The monster, whose eye was shining brightly, suddenly ran towards Chen, opening its mouth. Chen Chu immediately prepared himself for battle, wondering what kind of zombie-like monster was next to him. And then the man managed to decapitate the body of the monster with just one blow, which did not even have time to touch Chen. A notification appeared that Chen had killed the defective demon corpse, and then he turned his gaze to the doorway. Then Chen realized that this was the city of Tiger Mountain that had gone into the lake at night that Du Hong had spoken of. The guy thought that after all, the city was not destroyed by other people, but ended up in another world. He decided that he should go back. All this time, Chen was being watched by a little girl who was standing on a branch of a withered tree. After watching the man leave, the red-haired girl quickly tore off a piece of meat that she was holding in her hands with her teeth. At the same time, Chen used 2 points to improve his electrical powers. The news was that Tiger Mountain City had sunk. 180 people were missing and 30,000 were displaced. While reading the news, Chen thought that if all 30,000 missing people had become monsters, it was hard to imagine how many stat points there were. Lai called Chen and asked Chen to check where the 30,000 people who had been displaced from the city were 20 years later. Chu smiled and agreed. The next day, Chen asked for a small metal house and a huge, thick, strong knife to be made for him. Li replied that this could be quite difficult. Chen asked if Boss Li really thought someone would run around causing chaos over a 10-kilogram knife. Chen thought that the monster corpses were strange creatures and he might get infected, so he also needed armor. At the Haixian Hotel, people were chatting that the information about the survivors in Tiger Mountain City was contradictory because even the authorities were lying. Sitting behind the wheel of his car, Chen realized that his suspicions had been confirmed and 30,000 people had been buried. At the same time, Iguana looked at the fish corpses, thinking that he had already caught more than 40 that day, but he still lacked 300 evolution points. And just a few moments later, a huge villa appeared before Boss Chen's eyes. The owner of the villa, Miss Lin Qingge, came out to Chen and praised the guy's taste. Chen pointed to the stack of money, saying that they could start after Lin checked it. Finally, Iguana was offered to evolve and she happily agreed while eating fish. Within a few moments, the lizard began to wriggle in the water, and a fiery dome appeared around it. Chen chuckled as he looked at his hand, which suddenly became lit up with a red flame. The man thought that now he could even hear ants rolling food hundreds of meters away. The man's body was filled with a haze as he realized that his strength and speed had doubled, and he had also risen to the ground level. Now, because Chen had eaten all the tiger-headed fish, he had access to electric fire breathing and lightning control. Iguana had incisors on his back and he had grown to 40 meters in length. He now decided to call himself Godzilla. But after using fire breathing, Chen realized that he was still weak and his electric attack was only average in strength. But then the lizard's gaze fell on a gorge from which someone's huge red eyes were visible. The lizard turned black and opened its mouth at the monster, realizing that after eating its victim, it would be able to split the aircraft carrier in half with one blow. The lizard, which now looked more like a dragon, easily tore off a piece of the victim's flesh, realizing its superiority. That tiger-headed fish gave the lizard more than 2,000 evolution points and a lot of fire energy, and that cave should be its territory. Then the lizard clenched its teeth even harder but still began to move faster towards the cave. The lizard found the skull of a huge fish that had been impaled on a pole. And then the iguana was pierced by fear, and power was seething in her body. A notification appeared that Iguana had found an ancient factor, but was she sure she wanted to open it? And a moment later, the lizard had already absorbed the ancient factor and underwent an unusual evolution, receiving the energy of the scarlet flame. And then the lizard opened its mouth wide, from which flew a ball of burning energy. And just a moment later, a huge explosion was heard in the distance, which pierced tens of kilometers. The iguana herself was surprised by this terrifying power because one shot of energy made an entire island disappear. Chen was already dressed in titanium alloy armor and held a 20-kilogram sword in his hands, which he decided to call Heavenly. The man then chuckled and stepped back, realizing that after he evolved, he could detect other creatures. Chen remembered that little girl with pigtails, wondering if she was a monster and one of the survivors with special powers in Tiger Mountain City. Then Chen Chu came to a new world where he was immediately greeted by monsters. He exclaimed that the city was more lively at night. And just a moment later, Chen sharply pierced the demon's corpse and then strengthened the heavenly sword. Chen then decided to improve the toughness and sharpness aspect by increasing the points by 2. Then, before Chen's eyes, a huge demon corpse appeared, which didn't even have a body but was just dissolving into thin air. Turning back to the silhouette, Chen said that the demon's attack was indeed fast. And just a few moments later, Chen stood over the mountains of demon corpses, swinging his sword. Chen used 5 points to increase the armor's resistance to attack and spent the remaining points on increasing the sword's sharpness. But then the brunette's calm gaze changed dramatically, becoming more tense and angry. Turning around abruptly, Chen Chu once again noticed the silhouettes of demon corpses approaching him. Realizing the situation, Chen Chu suddenly ran with all his might, without even turning around to look at the enemy. The demons immediately rushed after him and then aimed golden chains at the man, which almost caught him. But just a few moments later, notifications appeared again that Chen had dealt with the demons. But then a huge demon appeared before his eyes, which was about 10 times his height. The demon rushed to hit Chen, but he managed to respond to the attack in time, hoping that he had not been saving up points in vain. Crouching on the ground, Chen realized that the demon was as strong as he was, but too slow, and it was not interesting. The demon rushed to attack, but Chen soared into the sky faster. And then a notification appeared that the corpse of the armored demon had been killed. Chen realized that since the monster was a level 5 monster, it explained why he had to hit the enemy more than 10 times to kill it. Chen said that he lacked Oko's movement, and then he heard an uncertain voice asking him to run. Then the guy's gaze fell on the girl who hid between the houses. Chen realized that she hardly had any evil intent. Chen knelt down in front of Shishi and stroked her head, saying that she would now be his sister and he would take care of her. And then Chen Chu called Cici to the city so that he could buy her some new beautiful clothes. Chen was riding in a car with Xi when he asked her if she knew anything about the dark river in the flooded region. She said she knew about it, but there was a black tide and it was dangerous. After some time, Chen bought his younger sister a new white dress and also tidied up her hair. Chen then pointed to the table and said that the food was there. He then offered them some food and the girl immediately rushed to the bags. Then Chen began to look at his own characteristics in the system, which were quite good. Chen realized that he had been completely covered during the battle, which suppressed the scarlet flames. And so he could show an explosion that would definitely kill everyone. Chen's body burst into flames as he surpassed the intermediate level and became 3 times stronger. At the same time, 5 people gathered at Sing University. Glasses said that their training place was similar to the lieutenant's place. The girl asked again if they had really attracted the attention of the secret department. A man came in and said the department had moved to the city and that after the training was over, the participants would become lieutenants. Those present exclaimed that they wanted to participate. Meanwhile, in the warehouse, Chen Chu was still training, continuing to hit the tree. Chen muttered that his body was causing the power of the scarlet flame to gather inside and burst out, and he would call this movement annihilating flame. Crouching on the floor, Chen thought that 100 blows were more than enough. And if he encountered the demon's corpse again, he would knock it down with 3 blows. At the same time, the roads in front of the Ning University campus were brightly illuminated by the sun. The girls around him looked at Chen, saying he was handsome. The boys said he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. The man behind the wheel reminded him that Chen had saved Lin Roy from 4 kidnappers a month ago. The bespectacled man asked again if it was really that important. The blonde asked again in bewilderment, and the bespectacled man said that the kidnappers were most likely just desperate guys. At the same time, Chen Chu continued to walk with his younger sister, sitting with her on a bench. At the same time, the lizard ate another fish, looking at the submarine in the distance. The lizard realized that this was a yacht filled with bandits, and that was why it was so small. It was a good place to test his strength. At the same time, the sailors shouted that the sonar had detected a rapidly approaching life form that would crash into them, and after a few moments the lizard accelerated again, quickly cutting through the water with its body. 2 cabins at the stern were damaged and leaking water, and the sonar was now damaged. The captain ordered to close the caplins and stop the flow of water, turn on multi-beam bathymetry, and set the destination. The sailor shouted that the huge creature was about 40 meters long, which is longer than a whale. The captain ordered to close the rear hatches and surface. The captain ordered to fire torpedoes and turn on the turbine to maximum power, but the lizard only grinned watching them. The lizard understood that it had reached a speed of hundreds of kilometers per hour, so the torpedoes would not be able to hit, and the show was just beginning. Then a black submarine appeared before the lizard's eyes, trying so hard to hide from him. And the lizard suddenly hugged the submarine, as if directing it somewhere and ignoring the torpedoes around. And just a moment later, there was a huge explosion underwater, which burned the submarine. The lizard understood that their explosions were not good because he could get hurt too. Therefore, it was worth becoming even stronger. That same evening, a girl who was dancing ballet on stage appeared before the guy's eyes. One of the spectators said that this new girl is one of the four most beautiful students because she dances like a bird. The man immediately recognized the girl who was performing on stage, immediately tensing up. Cece said that the ballerina was very beautiful. The blonde was dressed in a white dress. After finishing her performance, she smiled softly and bowed to the audience. But suddenly a strange silhouette appeared behind the blonde, who was waving to all the guests. The guy handed Chen a bouquet, saying that he fell in love with her at first sight. The audience began to shout at him to get off the stage. The guests asked the president to stop embarrassing himself. Chen said that the audience would not allow her to agree, but she did not have warm feelings for him either. After some time, the performance ended. Chen met Chen on the street and asked if he remembered her. The girl pressed her hands to her chest and recalled that last month Chen called the police and saved a girl who was high on drugs. Chen said he remembered it, but then asked what Chen was getting at. She immediately blushed. The guy awkwardly walked around the girl, saying that if she didn't mean anything by it, then he'd better go. Chen muttered that Chen was the epitome of a man born with a silver spoon in his mouth, unlike Wei Jian. That night, Chen wore his armor, muttering that if Xishi's words were true, the dark tide would soon arrive, and so he needed to find a cave. Chen said with a smile that everything on that land would disappear, and the cave would be 30 meters deep and 4 to 5 meters high. Moving on, Chen easily dealt with several second and third level demons. Looking at the demon's flaming corpse, Chen asked if he could increase the cloth's resistance to demon attacks. At the same time, Chen was upgraded to the level of unusual demonic armor, which made him invulnerable to ordinary flames. And the lizard at that moment thought that there is little deep water in the Pacific Ocean. It is difficult to find a mutated one, so it is worth hunting on fish farms. Diving underwater, Iguana found a school of fish, thinking that more than 21 fish should be enough for half a day. Chen fought the monster, realizing that his enemy's blows were faster than even the speed of sound. But then Chen looked up to see the corpse of the demon that called him fresh meat flying towards him. Chen glanced at the demon's corpse, realizing that it was not typical for them to be nimble with a sword. Chen thought about how when the demon held the blade, his hand trembled twice, changing the trajectory of the sword. And then he realized the reason for this. Shouting that it was time to end this, Chen suddenly ran towards the frightened demon. But then a strange face appeared on the monster's chest, smiling, and its eyes were bright red. Jumping up suddenly, Chen used up his massive reserves of fire energy, nearly exploding himself. Sharply extending his sword towards his opponent, Chen decided to use destructive fire. And then the face on the demon's chest stopped grinning, suddenly opening its eyes wide in horror. And then the man cut through the 5th-level demon's corpse with one blow, killing it. A notification appeared that Chen had researched the core element of thermonuclear fusion, but he needed to spend 10 points to obtain it. Having agreed, Chen's weapon was enhanced with demonic materials and elevated to an extraordinary level. Then the man swung his sword sharply, and at that moment the sky was filled with red flames. Smiling, Chen realized that he could now combine the power of fire and lightning, creating blasts of energy from his sword. After some time, a huge monster that resembled a spider appeared on the other side of the city. Chen looked at the corpse of the demon, which had mutated to look like a spider. He decided that he had better go back first. In the warehouse, Chen walked out of the portal and Shishi said in a trembling voice that she would close the door. Chen realized that if she could close the formless door, then she had power over space. He hoped that the remaining corpses would not crawl out of the door while he was gone. A notification appeared that Chen can upgrade the warehouse space, but each meter will cost 10 points. Chen took the huge knife, muttering that he was just about to complain about how inconvenient it was to carry a weapon around. But now they had given him a place in the warehouse. In 3 hours, Iguana's body grew another 6 meters, and he himself received more than 500 evolution points, and also ate a delicious meal of fish. The man on the boat called Shan Tianjun, asking what happened to the fish. He said, looking at the tuna carcass, that there was enough oxygen, Then the man noticed the blood that was spilling across the sea, exclaiming that something had happened to the tuna. But the men didn't even have time to do anything, because a moment later the iguana smashed their corral with a blow of its tail. Chen was already at the villa, arguing that he had more than 100 points left, so he needed to increase something. Chen then increased his chi sense from 100 meters to 500 meters, and his moon step now allowed him to remain in the air for a while. Chen was combing Xi's hair when the news reported that a black fog had appeared in the city, covering hundreds of kilometers and causing the disappearance of 50 people. Chen thought that it was like a black tide in Tiger Mountain City, meaning that there would be no more peace in the world. At the same time, a huge submarine was sailing in the sea on Aoding Island. The red-haired man asked Sean Benjamin how Professor Kant's research was progressing. The scientist replied that Kant had obtained a special substance from the bodies of giant animals, and he had also discovered a method by which the animal regenerates. The mutated man asked if Kant could now create unusual people. Sean replied that they could also control huge animals. They then landed on the island, saying that a miniature nuclear power plant had arrived to them and was almost at its destination. And then they approached a huge biochamber, where a huge animal was locked, its stomach pierced. The man who set up the biochamber said that the installation was complete, and they had already joined in to transfer the core energy. Kant said that the energy of the core passed into the body of the beast and it recovered. He considered the animal intelligent enough to understand the danger of the collar on it and to follow the instructions. Sugimoto stood behind him and, smiling, said that the professor was smarter than Einstein. But the monster began to resist and slowly turn its head as if trying to wake up. Kant smiled madly, realizing that the beast would soon wake up. At the same time, Iguana was watching them. He understood that those comrades were trying to reanimate the animal and therefore must die. And just a moment later, the lizard finally emerged from the shadows, suddenly rushing forward. When a giant lizard rose above the scientists, the order was immediately given to shoot it, otherwise they would die. Kant turned to the frightened Sugimoto, saying that they should go to the submarine. The military tried to defend themselves from the monster by any means necessary, shooting at it and throwing bombs. But the huge lizard didn't care about this because the people's weapons had no effect on it. As Iguana walked further, Sugimoto turned around in fear and almost screamed. The lizard suddenly pulled its head out of the huge clouds of smoke, frowning in irritation. The lizard then walked further towards the military, breathing heavily and pushing the smoke away from itself. The soldiers muttered in fear that they were firing armor-piercing rounds and exploding bullets, which are used in wars. Then the soldiers tried to attack again, but the lizard only became disappointed in the weakness of people. And then the lizard opened its mouth wide, and at that moment the whole laboratory was engulfed in a hot fire. The man who had previously tried to escape suddenly froze in place and began coughing up blood. At the same time, Sugimoto was helping Kant climb into the submarine, and the lizard froze for a moment. The lizard turned around abruptly and cast an irritated look with its yellow eyes at the men. A moment later, the lizard was able to easily blow up a boat that was a couple of kilometers away from him. And then Iguana turned her gaze to the huge animal that was still in the biochamber. Looking at it, the lizard herself could not believe that it had actually reanimated. Feeling the terrifying aura around him, the lizard realized that it would be better to just kill him. Then the animal's body was blown up, and before dying it only screamed that it had just woken up and was not strong enough yet. Looking at the shining corpse of the animal, the lizard decided to absorb the damaged ancient mind. Then a notification appeared that Chen's clone had rested and received 10 points. The guy was surprised, sitting next to C. They were sitting in a random cafe when suddenly a certain person called Chen Chu. Situ Chen wrote to him and suggested that they grab a bite to eat the following evening. Chen immediately grimaced but still answered her that he would pick up the girl at 11. When Chen found himself inside the teleportation door and was running from the monster, he was glad that his 3 swords could even cut down a tank. And then, Chen tore the 4th-level demon's body into pieces with one blow, gaining 50 points. But then Chen suddenly turned around and ran in the other direction, sensing something. Then, before Chen's eyes, there appeared a huge, elongated monster that was striking with lightning. The monster was able to damage Chen's extraordinary defense, and he immediately strengthened it. And then the man suddenly exploded, leaving the monster frozen in surprise for a moment. Then the man jumped up sharply and the monster was about to strike, but suddenly a dome appeared above him. Chen immediately created a wall of energy and then wondered what he should do next. And just a few moments later, Chen cut off the monster's head, receiving 200 points. Chen improved his chi sense and scarlet flame, and was then delighted that the temperature of his fire had increased to 10,000. Chen thought that his attack range had increased to 30 meters, so he could even knock down a dragonfly with a blow. Then a system window appeared, showing Chen Chu's level and other data. Chen sat on the sofa with Chi-Chi, thinking that he had obtained explosive flame for close-range strike and scarlet flame for long-range strike, as well as chi sense, various weapons, and armor for repelling demons. Chen looked at his flaming hand, realizing that he should practice his resolving strike, sky jump, and electricity control. The next day, Situ stood next to Chen, asking him what he would eat since she would pay for everything. People behind him whispered that the girl could not resist the temptation of a luxury car. Arriving at the restaurant, the guy ordered 2 wildflower dragons for 4,000. In the end, the guy ordered 70,000 and the girl was only counting on 10, because otherwise that amount would cover her 3 months of living expenses and benefits. Chin awkwardly said that she only took 10,000 and then asked him to lend her. Chen said that she could enjoy the meal since he paid for everything. Chin asked in admiration if Chen had opened a seafood company. She said that she had heard that Chen did not go to school often because of his work. Chen smiled and replied that he didn't go to school because he was busy killing monsters and leveling up. He didn't have time to run the company. Chen asked again if leveling up was like a game. Then she was surprised by the huge crab on their table. Looking at the dish, Chen thought that if the apocalypse came, he would hardly ever be able to enjoy a luxurious meal. After some time, Chen found herself in a strange store with Chen, arguing that she had not expected to go to the lion. Chen smiled sheepishly, realizing that they had spent 100,000 in one evening, and she wouldn't even be able to buy Chen's button with the allowance. Chen grabbed Chen by her clothes and said that they would buy her clothes. She was dumbfounded by such a gesture. They went into the store and bought about 5 bags of clothes, which made Chen feel quite awkward. The cashier recalled that the girl Chen had come with before was pretty, but he had found someone even prettier within a couple of weeks. Chen blushed, realizing that Chen had bought her $30,000 worth of clothes on their first meeting. Was he really throwing money away so easily? Then Chen looked at the guy leaving, realizing that he was not going to take her to the hotel. At the same time, monsters appeared in the hall nearby and devoured people. Chen was able to sense this, and so he frowned sharply, trying to get a better idea of what was happening. Chen turned around and said that he had urgent business to attend to, so he would send Chen back to school. She thought that he had no intentions towards her. Chen couldn't understand if Chen wanted them to slowly get closer and she was just making it up. The guy didn't pay attention to the girl's absent-minded face, reasoning that space had exploded nearby. A little later, Chen walked past the empty hall, carefully glancing at the bloodstains on the floor. The guy frowned, realizing that even though this was the real world, the poisonous aura still appeared. Turning the corner of the building, Chen found the demon. It chuckled, saying that the guy had found it after all. And then the monster suddenly pounced on the guy, screaming that then he should die. And just a moment later, Chen killed the low-level demon with one blow, shattering its body. Then Chen realized that the monster was simply poisoned, and not demonic like that dark elf. After some time, the captain stood over the monster's body and said that he wanted to use that monster to see if the hard work paid off. But then the man said that someone had killed the monster before his partner. The girl said that it was someone very strong, who controlled fire. The man with the beard asked when someone who could control fire appeared in the city. The news said that a large number of space ruptures had appeared in their world, and that an apocalypse was coming. Chen realized that the apocalypse of 1999 was coming, and over the past 20 years, more than 500 cities had perished on the battlefield. Chen realized that they had paid with their blood for 20 years of their peace, and now they had entered an era that belonged to ordinary people where anyone could become special. Looking at his phone, he realized that he had sent it to his grandfather, but it was still not enough. Chen knew he had to report to the city's special department if he wanted to get more information. At the same time, the lizard fought with a huge mutated whale that could make seawater heavier. But the lizard pressed her lips together tighter and realized that this was a useless ability. And just a moment later, the lizard sharply pierced the body of a huge whale, which was larger than it. Once the lizard ate this whale, it would have received at least 10,000 evolution points. Meanwhile, a group of guys were sitting in the recreation area of the city's special administration. Glasses said that whoever killed the monster yesterday, he was better than all of them anyway. The pink-haired girl looked away, wondering if this was the guy who did the impossible. A man with a beard came in and asked if they wanted to see the first recorded evolving human. And then Chen appeared in front of the group of guys dressed in a tight, closed suit. One girl extended her hand, saying that this was the guy who drove up to the school in a fancy car. The girl with pink hair blushed, realizing that it was him after all. The man with the beard frowned deeply and with displeasure, also recognizing Chen Chu. The man said that Chen would have to pass a strength and speed test. He was required to hit a punching bag as hard as he could after being given a command. The guy asked Li how strong Chen thought he was, and he said he was probably around 3 stars. The guys continued to guess how many stars Chen would be able to knock out. Most of them still bet on 4. And then Chen hit more than 5 stars, causing the punching bag to even start smoking. The captain said that Chen could get 50,000 every month, and if he wanted to join them, he would get much more. But Chen refused because he always played alone. The captain smiled and asked if Chen Li had killed the monster sent yesterday. He immediately agreed. The captain said that Chen had great strength, like the awakened ones he saw recently. And with his talent, Chu could be taken as a disciple by the fighting god Jiang if he joined the management. But the guy just smirked at the fact that people saw the ceiling of the fighting god Jiang's capabilities. Chen knew that his lizard had to remain a secret, and he had other ways to become stronger. Then he smiled and politely declined. A notification appeared from a special city saying that the first evolved 5-star Chen Chu had appeared in their city. Chen received a call from a red-haired guy who asked if Chen had evolved to 5 stars. Chen laughed in response and promised to take care of Boss Li while he sat on the sofa. Even classmates Chen hadn't seen in years called to congratulate him. Chen laughed, realizing what it was like to be a god among men. After eating the giant whale, the lizard became 90 meters long. Its strength increased to almost 2,000 points and 70 tons. Chen chuckled, muttering that with his coating he could even withstand an armor-piercing shell. And if he was compared to other evolved ones, he was at level 7 or 8. Chen Chu sat on the sofa thinking that there was still a noticeable gap between these 10th-level battle gods. In a peaceful world, even if his strength grew every day, it would be difficult without a worthy opponent. There would be an unchanging and all-consuming feeling of endless emptiness. But now everything was different, because the apocalypse had come and terrifying monsters had stepped through space and time, ending up in their world. Now, countless powerful awakened ones fought alongside the evolved ones and the war gods. Chen Chu was genuinely happy that they would all be able to be on the same field and fight. The stakes were rising, and Chen Chu was finally able to stand shoulder to shoulder with these gods. But the young man's plan was a little broader, as he was going to suppress the gods and become the strongest being. The mental tirade was interrupted by the sharp noise of a telephone ringing. When Chen Chu picked up the phone, he had already called back, but there were many incoming messages in the chats. There, someone with the nickname Little Carnation wrote that he wanted to wake up just like his boss to become an angel with beautiful wings. After reading the chat a little more, Chen Chu reminded everyone not to relax at work. All of his female employees immediately responded with consent and returned to work. All except one who made a face and only then lazily returned to work. Something very interesting was happening in the warehouse that belonged to Ka Do-kak. Someone whose arms looked like steel prostheses summoned a heavy sword from space. It was Chen Chu who came here for another training session. He turned to Xiaoxi, the little girl standing next to him, and said that they were back. The girl summoned something that looked like a holographic door from somewhere and said that she opened it. She walked forward a little further to make sure everything was working as it should. Chen Chu asked the girl to wait in place and not move while he scouted out the situation. A man in armor that covered his entire body like a second skin approached the door. As soon as he stepped over her, a strange smell hit his nose, and he realized that something was wrong. The door led him to a new place every time they opened it. So if he wanted to check out the world on the other side, Xiaoji had to keep the door open. But even if that were the case, perhaps some even more terrible monster might have learned about the door's existence. Chen Chu immediately remembered the red-eyed monster that was chasing him. He thought that the monster might have sent someone else after him. Then he wondered if this world was really created by chance. Whatever it was all quite good, and it all played into Chen Chu's hands. The system warned the young man that the temperature here was too high, which killed most living beings. The young man stood in the middle of this space, enveloped in tongues of strange flame that did not touch him. He thought that a warm breeze could relax him now, but his ability blocked it all. The system announced that Chen Chu's body was affected by the substance, and his body was blocking the temperature. The immunity to fire and heat was supposed to last for another 15 hours. The youth thought that the awakened war gods would probably remain untouched, and would not only have a buff for 15 hours. But he couldn't waste time on unnecessary thoughts, so Chen Chu went to look around. He used his skill to analyze the surroundings and the aura around him. Waves, somewhat reminiscent of echolocation, spread across the hot space. Chen Chu didn't detect any sign of life or even a monster. All that was left was to ask Xiaoxi to open another door to try his luck there. As soon as he thought about this, a strange movement was felt behind the young man's back. There, a strange monster began to gather from the flames, trying to attack Chen Chu. The monster did not succumb to any attacks and every now and then dissolved and dodged in flight. It was a level 3 poisoned smoke monster and didn't pose much of a threat. The young man didn't even notice it at first, but now it was clear that there was at least something in this world. The monster raised its fist into the air to attack Chen Chu, but the attack failed, as the young man was covered by a shield, protecting him from all attacks of his opponents. Chen Chu thought that it wasn't his feelings that were the issue, but the fact that this monster was completely not alive. Since it was a monster, he had to use thunder, which repels evil spirits, to destroy it. Covering his body in a blue aura, Chen Chu was about to attack the enemy. He summoned a technique called the electric arrow. The next moment, a shining beam of blue light headed straight towards the monster, and the beam hit the target, tearing the monster into pieces and causing it to burn. Now it really has turned to ashes, as befits its name. The system said that Chen Chu had dealt with a level 3 monster and received 20 attribute points. The young man looked at the defeated enemy and could not believe that it was a 3rd-level monster. This monster seemed powerful to him, as it was impossible to take it with physical attacks. He was just lucky that he had a talent for electricity. Suddenly, the young man heard someone's footsteps next to him, which seemed familiar to him. Chen Chu turned around and saw Xiaoxi, reminding her that he had asked her to wait outside the door. The little girl stood in the middle of the burnt wasteland and could not answer. She said that she was very worried about Chen Chu because it was very dangerous here. Chen Chu misunderstood and said that there could also be danger behind the door. He asked the girl to stay away from him and under no circumstances come closer. The girl smiled and agreed with everything, dissolving into thin air. Once Chen Chu was sure that Xiaoxi was not in any danger, he decided to continue his investigation. The young man used his ability again to scan the surroundings. Chen Chu started moving towards that object at an incredible speed. The young man did not want to miss anything, so he was going to hurry. He jumped on the rocks but still saw nothing, thinking that he might have killed the only monster. Having climbed to the top of the highest cliff and having opened up a magnificent view, the young man stopped. At the top of the mountain there were several stone structures that looked like arches. He looked a little more closely and noticed some iron chains stretching through space. It could be called a structure, but it looked more like a confined space or a prison. There was definitely something sealed inside that prison, and that monster was no longer sleeping. Chen Chu got closer to the creature and said that it was a real treasure hidden in this world. It was the dragon Vandenfeld, also known as the Fire Wings. Chen Chu said that he didn't even want to think about what kind of stats this dragon had, because most likely they were impressive. The dragon spoke, saying that stupid people had summoned him without thinking about their lives, which was funny. The dragon said that this was his world and Chen Chu was an intruder here, and he himself came to surrender. He offered to give the young man 2 options since he still considered himself merciful. The first option was to bury Chen Chu right here in this world, although most likely there wouldn't even be ashes left of him. The second option was for Chen Chu to become the dragon's servant, but only as long as he acknowledged the dragon's power. Chen Chu just smiled after listening to all the options the dragon listed. He said there was nothing he could do about it, but right now he needed the bones of this dragon. Hearing this statement, the dragon lost his temper and trumpeted that Chen Chu did not think at all what he was saying. Although he himself understood that the man in front of him now had a significant advantage, since the dragon was bound in chains. Chen Chu said that he thought that the poison monsters were impressive, but now he was convinced otherwise. Then he decided to ask the dragon if those who agreed to serve him had become monsters. The dragon, as if confirming this, ordered all the summoned monsters to kill the man and throw the body into the lava river. The monsters kept growing in number, but Chen Chu didn't look scared, quite the opposite. The young man looked at the number of opponents in front of him and thought that this would be an interesting experience. He used his ability again and sent lightning bolts through the space around him again. One by one, he captured the monsters with these blue lightning bolts and killed them, releasing their souls from the dragon's captivity. Chen Chu dealt with the monsters in a matter of seconds, viewing it more as an act of virtue than mass murder. The dragon didn't even have time to understand what had happened. He only wondered where his servants had disappeared to. Chen Chu declared that the black dragon now seemed like an interesting pet to him. The young man smiled and offered the dragon to become his servant and follow Chen Chu. The dragon definitely didn't like this arrangement, and he shouted that Chen Chu was an idiot. The young man responded to this attack by assuming a fighting stance and hitting the ground so hard that it cracked. He was preparing for an attack from the dragon, so he made his sword bigger. The dragon looked quite threatening and seemed to want to eat the unwanted warrior at once. But the young man didn't care at all. He just continued to look at the black dragon with a smile on his face. Chen Chu swung his sword, spinning it in his hands and preparing to strike. A scratch from this heavy sword immediately appeared on the dragon's neck, and from the wound he had just received, golden dragon blood began to flow. The injury he received made the black dragon even more furious, and he promised to send Chen Chu to hell. Tongues of flame burst from the animal's mouth, indicating an imminent attack. The next moment, he sent a hellish dragon flame at Chen Chu, who was standing below. The young man did not hesitate and immediately assumed a defensive stance, confident that the attack would not affect him. And so it happened. The barrier around him did not allow even a single tongue of flame to reach Chen Chu. He turned to the dragon again, asking if this was all he could show him, to which the dragon again began a new attack, realizing that it was necessary to attack more sharply and powerfully. His eyes turned red with anger, and his fangs seemed to become even sharper. The dragon wished for Chen Chu to burn to ashes and then sent another powerful stream of fire towards him. The creature was sure that no one in this world could withstand even a second of its hellish flames. Imagine his surprise when Chen Chu's lively voice was heard from the cloud of dust, ash, and smoke. He smoothed his hair as if nothing had happened and said that the dragon looked like an ordinary, overgrown phoenix. Taking offense at Chen Chu's words, the dragon prepared to attack again. But this time, Chen Chu, who had managed to study the black dragon's attack style, did not lag behind in his attacks. He struck his sword straight at the dragon's jaw, causing it to throw its head back. Then another stream of incinerating fire burst out from the dragon's mouth, but it did not touch Chen Chu. The young man admitted that he had extraordinary control over flames and a layer of the Emperor monster's hand, which was the best defense against flames. That was why Chen Chu could simply ignore this dragon's flames, no matter how hard it tried. Realizing that nothing would work, the dragon once again resignedly repeated the information that Chen Chu was immune to his fire. The creature found this very interesting and fascinating, so it began to talk again. Then he leaned forward suddenly and said that he wanted to see if Chen Chu could survive a blow from his teeth. The next moment, the dragon's mouth slammed shut right where Chen Chu had been. But the dragon was at a loss again because the young man had already managed to jump away by that moment. He successfully landed on the back of this dragon and has not yet figured out what to do next. Chen Chu didn't seem to want to kill such a fascinating monster, but he also didn't seem to want to mess around with it for long. After a few seconds of thought, he finally summoned one of his blue lightning bolts and enveloped the dragon in a glow. Chen Chu's sword cut through the thick skin of this monster and came across something hard. This caused the young man to fall into a stupor for a few seconds in complete bewilderment. So he decided to continue the attack a little later and in a slightly different way. Chen Chu said that it was no wonder that everyone called this dragon Firewings, since it could change its color to red. But then the young man hastened to upset the dragon, saying that resistance was useless and he knew all his moves in advance. He also added that he learned one small move from the dragon, blood explosion. This information irritated the dragon even more, and he wished Chen Chu a quick death. But unfortunately, the dragon's next attack was unsuccessful, although Chen Chu was already raising his sword to strike. The dragon's neck was cut in half, and a trail of fire was still hanging in the air. The demon's head was also sent flying by the force of the blow. The system said that Chen Chu had killed a level 5 demon dragon and had received 1,000 experience points. Chen Chu, whose appearance had changed slightly, told the already dead dragon that their game was over. Xiaoxi suddenly materialized right in front of Chen Chu, somewhere near the dragon's head. She surveyed the situation and said that Chen Chu was strong and the dragon was dead. The young man finally experienced the effect of his 4,000 attribute points in physical blue. Although the dragon was strong, the young man only spent 10% of his chi and also acquired a new form. The young man thought that the dragon's size, teeth, flesh, and even blood were unusual materials. His head alone would be worth at least 100 million. There was just one snag, which was the difficulty of explaining to customers where he got the 5th level dragon head from. The young man still decided to keep his head, and then asked Xiaoxi to come down. After exchanging 200 attribute points to purchase the storage, Chen Chu placed the dragon head in it. Then he poured a few more attribute points into enhancing his intuition, because he had to see between the lines. After strengthening his intuition, he gave another 400 attribute points to increase the intimidation of his armor. The system was producing the armor's intimidation while Chen Chu smiled, happy with what he had already achieved. The armor was successfully reinforced, and it seemed that Chen Chu had even awakened the king's fear. It was said that this type of intimidation could cause a person to shake with fear, and even the slightest glance could make a person completely helpless in front of a person in such armor. Thinking about this, Chen Chu exhaled and decided that this would be enough for now. He thought these skills could be really useful for cleaning fish. A few hours later, a fishing vessel from one of the countries took to the waters again. The sailors on board were delighted that something was finally starting to bite. But as soon as they got the net out and opened it, they saw how few fish there were. But one of them was happy even about this because the fish was alive and thanks for that. Then another sailor noticed something strange to the side and pointed his finger to attract attention. Right next to them, the water rose as if a mountain had suddenly appeared from the seabed. The sailors stared in that direction with bewilderment on their faces and could not understand what to do. Suddenly, the water surface was pierced by several lightning bolts, which came out of nowhere on such a calm day. Fish began to jump out of the water and rain down on the sailors straight from the sky. Meanwhile, Chen was floating somewhere in his iguana form and scouting out the situation. He was somewhere deep in the sea and he was no longer interested in small fish. The royal intimidation made the iguana's suppression even stronger. Now nothing could move in its surroundings. At this time, Chen was still in that same fiery world and was trying out new abilities. He could now fly when he used fire and electricity at the same time. He thought that he was very lucky because people always strived for the sky. And now, while he was connecting these two forces, he was free from gravity. Chen couldn't get enough of his newly acquired ability, so he soared higher and higher, cutting through the clouds. During the flight, he suddenly noticed something strange somewhere very close. His intuition told him that there were unexplored places in this world. A creature that even the dragon that ruled this world did not know about must be hiding here. Although the dragon wasn't a ruler, he was just trapped here. So there must have been something more in this world that was holding him back. Arriving at the ruins of the giant kingdom, Chen had to climb up several tens of thousands of steps. As he climbed higher and higher, he looked at the walls on which many drawings were engraved. All these drawings chipped off and fell off over time, but one could still understand something from them. All this painting is a kind of history of this kingdom in pictures. Chen came to the conclusion that there was a civilization of giant dragons here, and they worshipped something. After thinking a little more, the young man suggested that there might be a dragon god here. He began to feel that somewhere here a gigantic danger was waiting for him. But after considering his chances of survival and his strength, Chen still moved forward. He looked at the fossilized dragons around him and realized that Firewings was their younger brother. The system issued several warnings that the poisoning in this area had worsened. There really was something strange in this temple. It didn't show its essence, but it could already increase the poisoning. Chen decided to try his luck, so he shouted for the creature to stop hiding and reveal its essence. His words about the creature needing to stop hiding echoed throughout the temple and bounced off the walls. With a premonition, Chen suddenly looked up above himself and realized that he needed to defend himself. Something resembling a huge ball lightning was rushing straight towards him at great speed. And then a very frightening monster without a face appeared before him. The monster's head was pierced and a black bottomless void was visible in it, which seemed to be sucking you in. The monster had 4 arms and could levitate, making it look like a deity. He couldn't speak because he had no mouth, so he just raised his hands up to attack again. The tips of his fingers were also cut off neatly. This was visible while he was performing the attack of eternity. Chen quickly realized that he had encountered something strange, so he froze for a few seconds. Suddenly he realized that he needed to protect himself somehow and put his sword forward to defend himself. The attack of strange black streaks of energy crashed against the material the sword was made of. Chen seriously considered whether his opponent could be a 6th level. And then, narrowing his eyes, he finally came to the conclusion that this opponent could only be a 7th level demon. The demon continued his attacks, still not attacking at full strength. He was able to speak and ordered Chen to bow to him and surrender. But the young man was not going to do either of these things yet, so he again assumed a defensive stance. Chen asked the demon if he really wanted him to kneel down. After gathering his thoughts, released the power that was hidden within him and was ready to attack even the demon. He lifted several dozen boulders into the air and was about to launch an attack on the enemy. Stones continued to break away from the nearby cliffs, as if the temple was dismantling itself. Chen whose face showed signs of his transition into a strong form, smiled. He said that now this demon must die for forcing him to worship. The demon also did not lag behind, also dismantling the temple and sharpening stones right in the air. He was about to immediately launch an attack called Bloodburst, which was only the first form. Chen remained standing in place without even moving after hearing the name of the attack. The next moment, he masterfully cut all the sharpened boulders into several pieces. He wielded his sword with incredible speed, as if he were the best swordsman in the world. What was also impressive was that he used a 2-handed sword with one hand. Then the young man got a little tired of the demon's antics, so he decided to go on the attack himself. He slashed his sword across the body of this monster and cut off two of its arms and a leg on the left side at once. It turned out that the demon's form was cut in two and Chen Chu was about to exhale. But the next moment, the young man felt the touch of cold fingers on the back of his head. The demon stood behind him and was about to attack, calling Chen Chu a disgusting ant. There was an explosion from which everything around began to shake again, and the dragon statues began to crack. In the middle of an endless sea of dust, ash, and smoke stood that same demon, grinning contentedly. But at some point, his contented smile disappeared from his face, as if it had never been there. Chen Chu, now burning with incredible anger so that fire was coming from the tips of his hair, said that he would put an end to this. It seemed like he had changed form again, and was about to use some kind of technique. The monster also didn't lag behind, preparing to call upon some kind of ball-type attack. Chen Chu at this time looked as if he had grown two fiery wings which were now lifting him into the air. The young man pushed off the ground and rushed forward, intending to kill everything that came his way. The monster was just about to strike him when Chen Chu's sword cut him in two again, but this time horizontally. And again, everything is like last time. The monster discarded the previous body and generated a new one. But just as he was about to revive himself, Chen Chu struck him again. This time, in addition to piercing the enemy with a sword, the young man also activated a blood explosion. The demon tried to somehow help himself or ease his own suffering. He was, however, not very successful, so all he could do was hang on the blade of his sword. And again, loud explosions thundered throughout the entire area, raising dust. Chen Chu's sword was now stuck into a stone on the ground, and the owner himself was nowhere to be found. And all because the young man decided that his weapon would only slow him down, and now he was going to deal with the monster with his bare hands. He jumped to the place where the monster was supposed to be and said that he would quickly sort everything out. The demon, apparently realizing what awaited him, tried to cover himself with some kind of shield. Unfortunately or fortunately, the shields were useless against Chen Chu's attacks. And a moment later, the man suddenly flew into the air following the shockwave. The body of the white-bodied monster was crushed into the ground, shattering it into pieces. But a moment later, the man again threw the monster with four arms away from himself. And then the monster's face, with black streaks, seemed to suddenly begin to crack. There was an explosion in the distance, the scarlet flame from which reached even the monster. Suddenly moving closer to the monster, Chen Chu suddenly grinned and swung again. And just a moment later, Chen suddenly covered the monster's face with his palm, causing it to become covered in fire. The man slammed the monster into the ground with all his might, but it disappeared and fiery rays began to appear around it. Then Chen only became more angry, blowing up everything around him and looking at the enemy's body. But a moment later, the monster disappeared again and appeared above Chen, watching him. Having measured Chen's approximate coordinates, the monster shouted a command, trapping him. Chen immediately turned around to look at his enemy in confusion, raising his tense gaze. And just a moment later, Chen Chu began to fall into the pieces of broken earth beneath him. Chen then tried to break free again, but his leg was suddenly caught in chains. Chen staggered as he tried to free himself from the trap again, but the chains only squeezed his body tighter. Chen then tried to use the power of fire, turning his intense gaze towards the enemy. A notification appeared that the formation that seals the dragon can collect energy and use it for its own weapon. The monster said that the more Chen tried, the harder it would be to get out of the net. But Chen Chu only clenched his fist tighter in response, saying that he was sorry because the monster wasn't good enough to seal him. Then huge tongues of flame began to emerge from the man's hands, and he crouched down, preparing for battle. At that moment, Chen chuckled, saying that he was different from those stupid ancient dragons. Then Chen Chu ran towards the monster, clenching his fists tighter and concentrating his energy. But then the monster disappeared from Chen's sight again, and he turned to it absent-mindedly. But then Chen smiled smugly and introduced himself to the monster. The snow-white monster froze for a moment, looking at its opponent in surprise. The monster continued to fly in the air while Chen looked at it smugly, freed from his chains. And then Chen began to slowly approach his enemy using fire. But suddenly the guy stopped, intensifying the flames near his body. But a moment later, the guy again boldly stepped towards his opponent. But then Chen decided to play by the monster's rules, and so he also suddenly disappeared. But a moment later, Chen found himself in front of the surprised face of the monster. And then Chen Chu swung again with all his might, clenching his teeth tighter in barely suppressed anger. The monster didn't have time to react to the appearance of the smiling Chen, and therefore just froze in amazement before dying. And a moment later, Chen abruptly threw the monster's body away from himself, forcing it to finally surrender. But Chen clearly had no intention of stopping there, and so he swung sharply at the enemy again. And then the man again pushed the monster's body away from himself with all his might, causing it to fly up. Chen began to rejoice in his own victory, increasing his speed more and more and smiling cheerfully. Within a few moments, the monster's body was torn into tiny pieces. But then the monster suddenly raised its head up for some reason as rocks were flying at it. Chen looked again in surprise at the entire body of the monster, who was only looking at the stars. But a moment later, there was a loud bang, causing puffs of smoke to appear in the air. A few moments later, Chen found himself in a vast area completely alone. In the eyes of the monster's corpse, Chen's reflection was visible, his hands controlling the fire around him. Towering over the monster's body, Chen Chu held its purple heart in his hands. Chen brought the organ closer to his mouth, saying that he also needed the power of the heart. A notification appeared that the lightning and scarlet flames had increased, and Chen had also received the sealing dragon talismans. But Chen didn't even pay attention to it anymore, breathing heavily due to the poisoning of a strange poison. Then Cece ran up to the tortured guy and said that Chu had dangerous poisoning. Chen reasoned that he had been fighting for too long, so the poisoning had gotten worse and he could no longer stay there. Chen hurried to fly up, realizing that without the protection of the sublime, the world of dragons and giants would fall apart. And then there was a loud explosion near the spatial door that stood in the distance. Chen was left lying among the rubble and rising clouds of smoke, and Xixi headed for the door. Then Chen began to breathe heavily and tiredly as wisps of smoke slowly drifted away from him. Touching the door gently, Xixi awkwardly told Chu that the door was closed. Chen couldn't answer right away. A bloody cough rose in his throat, and he doubled over. Chen said that once the door closes, the connection with the other world is lost, and no one knows where it will open next. She turned to Chen in fear, who patted her head and told her that he was okay, as it was just the price of his power. Chu understood that although the blood explosion seemed to be pure energy, only someone insanely strong could withstand it. If a normal person used the first type, he would be left with a corpse. Chen then tried to get up, reasoning that if he wanted to rise to the third type, he would have to increase his physical strength. Chen took the girl by the hand and said that since the teleportation door was closed, they needed to rest. At the same time, in the ruins of the palace in the lands of the giants, the snow-white body of a monster lay. The monster's hands seemed to have cracked, and he himself lay motionless on the cracked ground. A huge hole was visible in the monster's chest, from which purple blood was slowly flowing. But then the monster suddenly raised its head, along which ran deep cracks. Rising, the monster looked in surprise at his bloody chest and arms. He looked at his body in fear. The monster even froze in horror for a moment. And then the snow-white monster suddenly rose from the ground, looking at the sky and screaming. A man in military uniform reported the coordinates of a group of poisoned level 5 monsters and then asked for help. At the same time, dozens of monsters emerged from the gorge, their eyes shining brightly scarlet. 3 men stood on the mountain watching as demons were shot at from the sky. Hundreds and dozens of rockets flew towards the screaming demons who were trying to somehow cling to life. The man said he hoped the monsters wouldn't escape in the 6 minutes before the second wave of gunfire began. The bald man advised the brunette to relax, saying that the monsters eat their own corpses and do not move from the spot. The brunette wanted to know the percentage of demon poisoning, and Mark answered that it was 15.5. Then Mark frowned even more and said that they needed to hold out for another 8 hours. The captain smiled and told Mark that they would be able to drag everything back in that time. The bald man said that the bodies of 7 level 5 monsters would cost a pretty penny. Mark replied that they would need the money to increase their shooting power. Mark frowned and said that if at least 3 of them remained, he would be happy. The captain smiled and said that in his country, Z would have told Mark to consider himself lucky. The captain looked at the explosions in the distance, saying that if they hadn't needed the base's help, any of those monsters with full health would have covered their needs. The captain chuckled and said they should get going and give him the monster. He asked Tyler and Mark to move the bodies out of the way. The captain said that there should be enough for 5 bottles of cleansing energy, but they will take 3 and sell the rest. The man insisted that 1 bottle would cost 200 million on the black market, so for a while they would live like kings. At the same time, the snow-white monster finally managed to come to his senses, driving away the puffs of smoke. The huge monster increased in size tenfold and now reached to the sky as it towered over the men. The captain's face suddenly became scaled as he looked at the monster in fear and asked what it was. Smoke hovered around the monster's body as it slowly approached the men who tried to escape. Mark began to shout and list the poisoning ranges, which ranged from 19 to 531. Then a tentacle of a monster appeared behind them, and with one movement it cut off Mark's head. The captain looked at the corpse of his comrade in fear, exclaiming that it was time for him and Tyler to run. The captain ran away with all his might, but Tyler was torn apart by the monster at the same moment. The monster watched the man's movements carefully, blocking his exit with a tentacle. And then the monster's gaze changed, and the line of his mouth suddenly compressed into a thin line. A moment later, the monster suddenly caught up with the man, causing his eyes to almost pop out of his head. But a moment later, there was a powerful explosion that tore the man's body into pieces. Having launched the rocket, someone reported that the elimination of all threats to the good of humanity had begun. After some time, Chen finally found himself in his bed and slept well. But after some time, the guy still had to get up, and then he reluctantly stretched. Then the boy knocked on his sister's door and said it was time for breakfast. A tearful Shishi came out of the door, wiped away her tears, and asked Chen to hug her. Looking at the baby's face, the man suddenly grinned, looking at her with love. Chen then hugged Shishi tightly and knelt down, asking what he should do with her. Chen hugged the girl tighter, and she quickly fell asleep right on her brother's shoulder. Then the guy decided to get up from the floor and carry Cece to the bed, but suddenly he heard a strange sound. Outside the door of his house stood a girl with bright pink hair, holding a small bag in her hands. She was wearing a latex suit with the words written on the back that she was delivering quick meals to satisfy their hunger. Huang Fujiang greeted Chen and said that a delivery had arrived for him. The guy looked at the girl in front of him with surprise, still not letting go of Sai. Jian smiled cheerfully and winked at Chen, greeting him again and handing him a bag of food. But for some reason, the guy's gaze only caught on the expensive motorcycle that was standing behind the girl. Chen said it was the first time he had seen a delivery girl so early, and on a $100,000 motorcycle. Jian said that she also had not seen people living in such an expensive residence and ordering delivery every day, especially with a child. Chen smiled madly and said that the lady knew him too well. And just a moment later, tongues of flame began to appear near Chen's body, reaching out to Jian. The girl staggered and suddenly dropped the bag from her hands, trying to justify herself. Jian shook with fear, saying that Chen Wu was the first evolved human of the new generation. Tears appeared in the girl's eyes as she said she was finally able to see Chen with her own eyes. But the guy didn't understand her reaction and just asked in bewilderment what the girl was getting at. The girl began to unbutton her suit, blushing awkwardly and saying that of course she had come to pursue Chen. The guy was momentarily stunned by this situation, and therefore could only ask again in bewilderment. Jian then turned around and walked towards the motorcycle, saying that she wanted to chase Chen. Turning around, Jian introduced herself and said that she lived next door and that they would see each other soon after the next order. Chen smiled and said that Li was being too tense because there was an investigation bureau in the city, and if the poisoning had spread, they would have rushed to them as soon as possible. Li asked how the bureau could compare to Chen, who had no one to answer for. Li Tianrui then leaned over and chuckled, saying that this was why it was important to know whose side Chen was on. But then, in response, Chen Chu only wearily asked what Li Tianrui was talking about. Li said that after yesterday's news, most of the houses in the wilderness near that mountain had changed owners. Li said the value of the entire neighborhood has more than tripled due to Chen's popularity, with rich people all fighting to move in. Li said the rich say they want Chen's help, but in reality they only want his resources. Li said that the rich people would not refuse any of Chen's offers until the monsters appeared, so he should help them too. Chen briefly thought about what resources he could get from the nobility. Li said that the businessman wanted to invite Chen to dinner, so he came to see him. Then the guy immediately chuckled and told Tian Jun that he would of course go. Li smiled and said that Chen had better keep his word and that he would see him later at Lin Shu's best hotel. Li said he saw Jian at his home and asked if Chen knew her. He replied that the girl had come to him and said she wanted to stalk him. Lai rubbed his chin thoughtfully and said that Jian could be a little bossy since she had gotten everything she wanted from a young age. The man said that if she liked Chen, he had better be extremely careful. Li said that behind Jian was Huang Futai, who is the richest man in N City. News has emerged that Country Z has used the most powerful equipment and reduced the level of poisoning, and public order has been restored. Village Y was attacked by scent monsters, hundreds were killed. A temple in Country R was poisoned by the corpse of a woman who was burned alive by monks and was reborn as a vengeful monster. 20 people were killed. Country Z announced its plans to end the apocalypse 20 years ago and created a system of protection and storage of resources that made the city the safest in the world. The pressure is mounting worldwide. The rich have rushed to Z-land and many of the possessed are now at the border. The black market is overflowing with disaster relief contracts. Meanwhile, people still continue to go to Ningchen University despite the apocalypse around them. The blonde sat at the table and continued to learn English words while listening to music. A girl turned to Chen Tian and asked why she was spending so much energy studying during the apocalypse. The girl with blue hair said that after graduation she planned to work as a translator, but the situation is so dire that it is no longer a problem for her. The girl said that no one even knows now whether people will live. And then she added that she still needs to find a high-ranking man and marry him. Chen Chu, who awakened with 5 stars, has extraordinary fire control power and has also gained wide fame. The number of discussions about it on the internet reaches 2,000 blocks, but besides fans, there are also doubters. Then the girl suddenly asked Chen what was going on between her and that ordinary guy. The girl playfully asked if Chen was already sleeping with him, but she only blushed in response. Chen put her hand to her mouth and asked what her friend was talking about. She thought that Chen was powerful, talented, and handsome. Qian thought that Chen was so perfect that no one could compare to him. Then the girl immediately dimmed, wondering if she really felt something for him. Then she suddenly received a call from Chen, and her friend hurried to look at her phone. Qian blushed and said she needed to go away. Her friend laughed and waved her hand, telling her to go. Walking out of the office door, the blonde-haired girl asked if Chen Chu had been looking for her. Chen asked the girl if she had time that evening since he had already booked lunch for them. The girl then pressed her hand to her chest and agreed to go to another meeting, smiling. At the same time, there was a terrifying silence near Huan's luxurious villa, as well as a small motorcycle. Huang Futai asked if his daughter had seen Chen. She threw the helmet on the sofa and said that she had. Huang Futai smiled contentedly and then asked Jian how she was feeling about Chen. She said that he knew about her spying on him. Jian kept saying that Chen became scary when he concentrated on something. The girl recalled the man's terrifying strength, saying that Chen was capable of becoming king. Huang poured tea and laughed, saying that old man Jian's guess was correct and Chen was strong. Jin said that Huang would not be able to buy Chen even for tens of millions. Huang said that Chen Chu was just a brat in his 20s, who wouldn't be able to fool an old man with his business experience. John said the world had changed and her father's money was not always the answer, but power was. Huang reminded him that Jian had only been there once, so she shouldn't even tell him about her sympathy for Chen. Jean said that she was not chasing Chen for her father's sake or for her own benefit from him. Then the girl barely closed her eyes and said that she just liked Chen. The elderly man responded with bewilderment and asked if his daughter was even serious. The girl pressed her hand to her face, hiding her embarrassment, and said that Chen was the first man who made her feel something in years. Huan exclaimed that all the high-ranking families from different cities had their eyes on her. Huang said that as long as Chen had human desires and emotions, they could be used. They just wanted to pressure Chen, make him bow down to them and join their ranks. Huang then said that Jian was too naive to try to fight them. But the girl only repeated the words of her aunt, who said that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Huang said that was true, and then asked if Jian really wanted to learn how to cook. Huan thought that his daughter, as is well known, was a little out of her mind, and now she had fallen in love with a man and even decided to change for him. Then the old man smiled, realizing that his daughter was very pretty, so she could really win Chen over. Jean said that she gave up cooking when she almost burned down the old house several times, but that would not happen again. The old man asked again. The girl then showed her back where their delivery slogan was written. She said that she would deliver food to Chen. Jean said she used her father's surname to start a delivery company. He was momentarily stunned. Barely breathing, the man whispered and coughed that his daughter had indeed spent the money on a food delivery business. Jean said she knew about both the small warehouse on the docks and the villa Chen had recently rented. The girl smiled and said that Chen always orders food for himself, even breakfast. The girl found someone who took Chen's phone and installed the app, so while he was ordering, she would be able to deliver his food. The old man grabbed his heart and coughed, and then asked in amazement what the girl was doing. Jian smiled in response and said that Chen would soon be touched by her sincerity. Chen sat tiredly in the black car, holding the steering wheel tightly in one hand. Chen stood in the parking lot of Ning University, and the students around him whispered that it was really him. Kine walked up to the guy, waving, while the other girls behind her could only envy her. Kine walked up to the car door and smiled, but Chen just chuckled and asked her to get into the car. One student looked after Chen, telling his friend that they were trash compared to Chen and Chen. The brunette replied that the leader was allowing someone's ambitions to destroy him, but they had all evolved and would soon catch up with Chen. The brunette confidently insisted that Chen Chu simply managed to achieve 5 stars first. Brunei said that according to the department, they are the best of the best, selected from 1 million people in the city of N. Brunette said that an outsider like Chen Chu was just lucky, and then asked Longzi's opinion on it. But Lunzi, blushing, watched one girl. Then he said that they were as talented as Chen Chu. Then Lunzi blushed even more and said that the girl in front of him was very pretty. And the brunette hit Lunzi in response and ordered him not to get distracted, because as long as Chen was arrogant, the girls would only look at him. Gritting his teeth, the brunette said that the most important thing for them now was to become stronger. Lunzi asked if they shouldn't tell Rin Roya that they saw Chen with someone else. The brunette placed his hand on Lunzi's shoulder, saying that he knew about his crush on Rin Roya, but she liked Chen. He said that Lunzi could fight fairly, and then, even if he didn't win, he would still at least be a real man. The brunette said that talking about people behind their backs is not at all heroic. At the same time, Chen Chu was already driving along the roads of their city, passing by ancient buildings. Kian excitedly told Chen that the second apocalypse would come in 2 weeks. Qian asked if there were a lot of monsters and the Special Assignments Bureau couldn't handle them. Would Chen do anything? Chen shook his head and asked why the girl suddenly brought this up. Qian lowered her head and awkwardly said that many people on the internet criticized Chen and called him a coward. Chen asked if it was because he had not joined the Special Assignment Bureau, and Chen agreed. Qian said that they say that Chen did not join the Bureau because he is afraid of encountering monsters that will appear in 2 weeks. Chen knew that he was the first student to evolve, so there would be those who would not like him. Qian asked what the guy would do in a critical situation. Chen Chu chuckled in response and replied that he would, of course, be on the front line. Chen said he did not join the Bureau because of the bureaucratic red tape, as it was not suitable for him to have to report before every action. Then Chen Tian blushed and shook her head, deciding that the one she liked couldn't be a coward. And after some time, Chen Chu and his companion entered a magnificent hotel. Looking around at those present, Chen realized that these were billionaires from the richest companies. One of the older men greeted them and said that his useless son had kept Chen informed of the situation. Li Cheng-hong said that they decided to form a security council and invite Chen to be its chairman to ensure their safety during the apocalypse. Chen-hong said that the security council would protect them, the old people, and ensure the safety of the villas around the hill against the poisoned monsters. Li said that since they would be protected, they would naturally pay Chen a reward of 100 million a month. Chen Tian was immediately stunned and speechless by such a huge amount, freezing for a moment. But Chen Chu smiled and only said in response that it sounded quite good. But then Chen said that this would be the price for protecting all the billionaires of these villas. Chen said he was confident the billionaires could reach more than the 30 billionaires living there if they split it up and each family paid $1 million. Chen said he had no idea how much they would ask for entry, 100 or 10 million. Chen then told the puzzled old man that it looked like a profitable business anyway. Huang asked Chen if this money was not enough. He replied that in times of peace, the rich stick together. Chen said that even if something goes wrong, billionaires will solve it with money, and that is why they act arrogantly. Chen said that the apocalypse swept them off their thrones in an instant, because everyone is equal before the poison monsters. Chen insisted that there was no difference between a prince and a pauper, and this made them, the billionaires, very unhappy. Chen chuckled and said that he understood them perfectly. Li came up and jokingly said that they were only doing this because of the rift in space that appeared a few days ago. Li said that the Bureau had to use nuclear weapons to drive away the monsters, and if Chen agreed, they would give him 200 million. Then Li smiled softly and turned to Tai and said that they, the old people, just wanted to live in peace. Huan said that Li's son was in the Special Assignments Bureau, so he was the one who knew the efficiency of those slackers the best, because they couldn't be relied on. Then Huang told Chen, calling him Dear Chairman, that he would give 300 million a month. The old man smiled and said that if Chen nodded, he would add 100 from his own pocket. Chen Chu raised the bill into the air and said that the money would become useless pieces of paper. He set the money on fire and said that after a few attacks they would become mere igniters. The girl looked at him with undisguised surprise in her eyes, as if he were crazy. People asked him about the usefulness of money several times, not believing their ears. One of those present said that this could not be, since the coming apocalypse was of a normal level. But Chen Cho simply asked them if they still hadn't seen the truth. The news said that only normally evolved individuals were sent to repel the attacks. Chen Chu asked why even the Special Bureau couldn't find the awakened 4th level. Everything that was happening suggested that this was not a real battlefield, and that the officials could not even take care of themselves. One of the men realized what Chen Chu was getting at and asked what he wanted from them. The young man simply threw up his hands and said that he didn't need money. And then he said that instead of money, he was interested in the special mud produced in Kowloon. As Chen Chu continued making strange demands for Beitai's special medicine, he looked like a demon. The young man's list was still not coming to an end, and the employees were trying to figure out how possible it was to get all of this. Chen Chu ended his list with a request for special supplies of Lantian gold. And also in 3 days, he wants to see the drawings of the mountain fortress and the constructed defensive structures in a month. The employee, who had been listening calmly until then, was surprised and asked when the mountain fortress villas had become a line of defense. And then he himself realized what he had said. So all questions about defense were dropped. Chen Chu, as if voicing his thoughts, said that those villas would become the center, and the natural terrain of the mountain would make the task of defense easier. The young man said that if these officials fulfilled his request, he would head their security committee. The hall was filled with the sound of applause towards Chen Chu. People said that it was no wonder that Chen Chu was the strongest person in the country. According to them, he frightened people with his strength and thoughtfulness, as well as his ability to foresee. Chen Chu smiled lightly upon hearing this, and the girl standing next to him looked at him with pride. After finishing the meeting and watching the officials' cars drive away, Li Chang said that Chen Chu had performed well. He then waved the hotel cards and said that his father had shares in the hotel. The young man invited Chen Chu to have some fun and also said that he would go first. Holding the hotel's VIP card in his hand, Chen Chu turned to the girl next to him and said that they couldn't refuse Li's brother's kindness. The girl's face blushed. She covered her mouth with her hand and agreed. Upon arriving at the hotel, Chen Chu decided that now would be the best time to start implementing his plan and check out some things. He walked into the luxurious executive suite and took off his jacket. The space around was soundproof. It reflected all signals. Nothing could get in or out. The girl looked at the young man in front of her and said that everything was happening too fast. The next moment, Chen Chu, with fire in his eyes, told her to be his girlfriend. Chen was a normal person, so when he controlled the energy in her body, he had to be extremely careful. As he was about to do something, Chen Chu gathered his ability at his fingertips and thought that if he was careless, he might hurt the girl. The next moment, magical power burst out of his hand and pierced the girl's body. When everything was done, the young man thought that her body had united with such energy and was slowly changing. There was no poisoning or mutation, so we just had to wait until tomorrow. The young man was going to use the dragon stamp to obtain some of the energy from the monsters he had absorbed. His plan was to force normal people to evolve, although it was a little dangerous. After several dozen minutes, Chen Chu explained to Chen that each new wave of the apocalypse would be stronger than the previous one and that she could not graduate from college. The girl looked at him with a lost look and asked what she should do besides studying. Chen Chu advised her to look within herself for answers and asked if she wanted to become awakened. Having heard about the possibility of evolving, the girl became a little happier and said that this was her dream. Chen Chu let her in on his plans to create seeds to make people as strong as the awakened. But then he also had to tell her about the risks, saying that his plan wasn't perfect. According to him, if the girl could not control this power, she could turn into a monster. Hearing about this prospect, Chen was not happy and wondered if she really wanted it so much. The next moment she said that if Chen Chu did this, then she was not afraid at all. She wanted to become independent to protect her mother, so she was always ready to fight further. And now she guaranteed Chen Chu that she would always fight by his side and would never become a burden. The young man smiled and was glad that she agreed to his plan so easily and without unnecessary questions. Throughout the entire existence of the crisis, no one has canceled the technological boom of humanity. That's why the news was now full of reports about a new application that was supposed to bring everyone closer to the evolved. The girl showed the entire application to Chen Chu, saying that several 100,000 people had already downloaded it. Then she showed the 5-star evolutionary, the managing bureau of Zhanghai City. According to her, these short videos could gain millions of views in a matter of seconds. Chen Chu looked at the video again and asked if they used special effects. The woman said that these were not special effects, but special filters that could be turned on with one click. According to her, such short videos helped the evolved ones to present themselves in order to earn the trust of the people. She said that Chen Chu was a celebrity they especially wanted to sign a contract with. They just needed Chen Chu to show his strength on video, and then his popularity would skyrocket. Having confirmed her words, the girl began to show Chen Chu videos of other users. There were different videos, like product advertisements and just show-offs. One of the content makers even agreed to appear naked in the advertisement for greater effect. The woman then said that Chen Chu could start broadcasting on their app right now, and they were ready to fulfill any of his demands. Chen Chu stood up and said that he was not a star, so he had no fans. But the woman did not calm down and continued to talk about how with his face, he could instantly earn millions of fans. She opened something on her phone and said that once he showed his face in the group chat, he would have a ton of fans. Chen Chu calmly listened to the woman talk about how he could get any girl he wanted. And then the young man coldly replied that he was not interested in such a thing. He asked the secretary to get the woman out of the office as quickly as possible, which she began to do. But the woman kept talking about filming commercials, which only made Chen Chu even more angry. She screamed that they needed a real hero and only Chen Chu could handle it. Then she decided to go a different route and started showing Chen Chu footage of other evolved ones. She told about the evolving from the city M who became a deity for people. She then showed a video of Yali Shand, whose left hand could become a sword, and whose video has been viewed over 500 million times. Then her story switched to the man from City F and then to the water-freezing man from City A. The girl ended her story by saying that people tend to be afraid and doubtful in the face of the apocalypse. So they need a real hero. The secretary stopped pushing the girl out of the office, but she continued to say something about hope. She continued listing the evolved ones with such enthusiasm that it became scary. Chen Chu thought that it would be a good idea to increase his area of control. Now he was being criticized online, so Chen Chu decided to agree to the offer, but refused to do the streams. Having heard a satisfactory answer, the girl was delighted and almost jumped for joy. That same evening, Chen Chu climbed onto the roof of the building under the gaze of numerous cameras. He rushed down to the drones, accompanied by a voiceover about how he was a light in the darkness. And in the confusion, he was the embodiment of hope. As he chopped down the monsters, a voiceover was heard saying that his sword struck with precision and grace, and he himself moved through the air in a deadly dance. A true hero fought not for glory, but for every life on Earth. In this video, Chen Chu cut the monster in half horizontally, which was accompanied by a special effect. Chen Chu was the first to evolve from the new generation, a fearless, legendary, benevolent protector. While reviewing the resulting video, someone said that it was some kind of apocalypse game. In the N-City Special Assignment Bureau, Chen Chu's team was sitting and they were saying that there were a lot of special effects in the video. One of the men said that Chen Chu must be stronger than the 5 stars and he was moving further and further away from them. Meanwhile, somewhere in a distant temple, the gates to some world opened. The monks, as one, stood in sync and with blissful expressions on their faces, blew greetings to the great Tengu. A strange man emerged from the gate who did not look like a man at all. It was that same great Tengu. A man with a gray beard and devilishly red skin walked forward, and a girl appeared from behind him. The girl who accompanied him was called Izanami. She was always and everywhere with the great Tengu. For some reason, the monks were horrified when they saw this girl next to Tengu. The girl asked if the monks were sure that they had discovered the cubs of that ancient animal, to which the monks answered in the affirmative. The national law stated that the resources of such an animal should belong to all mankind, but priority went to the discoverer. Izanami interrupted the monks' tirade and said that if they killed the creature, they could take all of its resources for themselves. Somewhere beneath the water, a submarine was moving. She swam further and deeper, approaching some kind of cave that had formed in the coral reef. People dressed in combat suits emerged from the submarine. It was the assault group of the country M, which was called Poseidon, and now they were all moving further underwater. They found some kind of paw prints and started talking about how the prints were frighteningly huge. Then one of the stormtroopers turned to the captain and said that he had found the skull of a monster whale 20 meters long. In front of them, there was indeed a huge pile of bones that looked like a whale's skull. But if it was a whale's skull, then there was someone nearby who was stronger than this monster. The group of men suddenly heard a piercing sound from the radiation meters on their hands. All the sensors were glowing red, indicating that there was radiation of 465 B here. And obviously the source of the radiation was now right before their eyes. Somewhere further in the cave, there was something else that looked quite scary and made sounds. One of the stormtroopers turned to his partners, asking if they had heard any strange sound. Then he looked at the meter on his arm, which continued to tick, and said that there was something wrong with that thing. The radiation level continued to rise, terrifying everyone present. The radiation reached 1,000 sieverts, and the men started talking about how even if they had been near a place with radioactive waste, it would not have been so high. A terrible monster with blue eyes looked at them from the cave, and it seemed to be in a hostile mood. One of the men said that the radiation had risen to 1,500 sieverts. Meanwhile, in the Haunted Sea Entertainment House, 2 people were talking about someone who went missing there yesterday. No police report was filed because the man thought the tourist was simply lost. The man who had been listening to all this suddenly slammed shut the file folder he had been studying. The police officer said that most likely the owner of the entertainment center was simply afraid that this would cause him losses. The man looked at him strangely, as if he had just been found out. The police officer continued to say that such a number of missing people was abnormal for a haunted house. That's why several men have now entered the game, saying that the Bureau of Special Assignments will sort everything out. One of the men said the sensor detected poison and was surprised that the poisoning began after they entered the haunted house. They moved a little further, and the young man asked if this was the theme room that the director had given them. The room looked like an old, dilapidated shrine with talismans scattered everywhere. One of the talismans fell from the ceiling and was about to fall to the ground or stick to someone, which was a bad sign. The young man turned around and looked into the void as if something was about to appear there. Then a doll with red eyes appeared right in front of his face, about to scare him. The young man was truly frightened and pushed the doll away from himself. It turned out to be just a cheap scare tactic, and the scarecrow fell apart immediately after it fell. The girl from the special squad looked at her colleague and said that it was just a prop and his acting was useless. Another young man looked at his watch, which measured the radiation background, and said that the source of the poisoning was approaching. As soon as these words were spoken, something strange fell to the ground. The men shouted to each other that they needed to be careful because they didn't know what they were dealing with. When the dust cleared, everyone present was treated to the sight of their partner fending off the attacks of a strange man with a chainsaw. The man with the chainsaw was unable to attack successfully, so he retreated a little. The young man was surprised and said that it was a 3-star monster with enhanced attacks and defense, as well as regenerative abilities. But one of the comrades didn't care that he ate 5 people and became even stronger. He was powerless against his extraordinary weapon. But in reality, the extraordinary weapon also did not pose a real threat to this monster. The monster continued to advance, and the poor young man, who had been so confident in himself, became less and less confident. He was told that the monster's weak point was its head, but he had already managed to hit it in the chest. Realizing that the attack had not worked, the young man grabbed a pistol and was going to finish it all off with one shot. He shot the monster in the head and the bullet passed through its skull, but it didn't seem to hurt the monster much. Another shot was fired by the girl who had been standing nearby the whole time. When the monster was defeated, she said that it was disappointing for a 3-star monster because it only took one shot to kill it. The young man, who had previously attacked in the wrong direction, was now trying to pull his weapon out of the monster's body. He was still trying to prove his importance and said that the monster was defeated so quickly only because his spear restricted its movements. Another young man tried to calm those present and said that they were a team and all worked together. The dark-haired youth asked the others to check the perimeter, and if there were no more sources of infection, they would report to the captain. Eventually, no more sources of infection were found, so the young people went to the captain. The man was just scolding them for the fact that there was a fatal flaw in their team's work. He asked why Panhao acted without the leader's instructions. Panhao looked away in shame, admitting that he was no smarter than Li Zongwen. Then it was time to reprimand the leader himself, and the captain said that he could handle planning and reconnaissance but was just sitting there. He had to understand that first and foremost, he was just part of a team, not a leader. Li Zongwen lowered his glasses and said that he was sorry and that he should have helped. Then it was time to scold Peng Lun. He asked about who his shield was supposed to protect. When he said that he had to protect his teammates, the commander asked if Lin Roya was the only member of his team. According to him, in battle no one cares about your personal interests, so everyone had to help everyone. Then he turned to 2 girls who were standing in the corner and were not stuck in dialogue. The man said that they are so careless that they don't even have a sense of danger, and the rest acted thoughtlessly as their team members fought the monster. The commander crossed his arms over his chest and asked where all his charges got such courage from. The man looked at them with all seriousness and said that this was some kind of game, and one mistake would make them corpses. Everyone had to take responsibility for their team members to ensure everyone survived. Then he said that he was done arguing and that their second mission could have gone even worse. With such strength, they were able to deal with a simple 4-star monster. Now he was going to reveal a military secret to them. Doomsday Base M was destroyed by a Monarch-level demon with a strength of over 10 stars. According to him, the authorities urgently raised the difficulty rating to 11, defining it as Armageddon. Upon hearing about the rating increase, everyone pricked up their ears and started talking about how they had never heard of such a rating. City M lost over 17,000 evolved overnight, and the government was forced to use nuclear weapons. As far as the captain knew, no monster corpses were found in the wreckage. The authorities only wrote that the monsters retreated. Everyone was horrified by the realization that even nuclear weapons do not stop the monsters. 17 doors of the apocalypse have been affected to varying degrees, and in 10 days, things will be much worse than expected. The white-haired girl looked at the captain and asked him how to become stronger. The man raised his hand with a glowing crystal and showed it to everyone present. According to him, time was running out. So the Bureau of Special Assignments distributed spiritual crystals. One of the squad was very happy when the captain said that the crystals could awaken hidden potential and allow his abilities to develop. And then the captain announced the main news that everyone present had been selected to use these crystals. Everyone on this team must get their final 4 stars in the next 10 days. All present agreed that they must do everything possible for the future of humanity. Chen sat on the seashore and read his statistics again, thinking that he could evolve 4 times in a few days. And after that, he will only care about the progress of Chen's evolution. Meanwhile, somewhere far away, a girl was crying, her eyes wide with horror. It was Situ Chen's dream where she sat on the scorched earth and watched the raging tornadoes. Then from these storms, a figure of a dragon with red, ominous eyes emerged. The dragon headed towards Chen with its mouth open and was about to kill her. The girl looked at the monster with even greater horror and screamed for him not to come near her. The next moment, the girl woke up and suddenly rose up in bed, still screaming for someone not to come near. The girl woke up in a cold sweat, and now she needed some time to understand where she was. Chen sat in a chair opposite her, asking how the girl was feeling. The girl didn't understand what he was talking about and asked. But instead of answering, Chen threw a porcelain cup in her direction. The girl immediately put her hand in front of herself to protect herself from the blow, and the cup broke. Chen was now able to break a porcelain cup on herself. Chen walked a little closer to her and asked her what it was like to be evolved. The girl looked at her hand and still did not understand what had just happened. The young man explained that the first level evolved were capable of hitting with a force of 500 kilograms. So evolution worked. The girl finally cheered up and couldn't believe that she had actually evolved. Becoming evolved has been the dream of people all over the world. The low-level evolution inductor has become in demand on the black market. Its price has skyrocketed to $50 million. However, using such a tool was associated with huge risks. The slightest mistake could turn the user into a mutant. People dreamed of evolving and were chained. And in special cases, family members stood with pistols until the evolution was completed. Once the body became destabilized, an unspeakably horrible death ensued. Despite this, countless people willingly accepted the risks of mutation and embarked on the path of evolution without hesitation. As the end of the world approached, the era of evolution began, and somewhere on Aocho Island, Izunami watched as it happened. The girl turned to someone standing behind her and asked Ibis to open the way. Ibis agreed and said that he would do everything right now. He rushed forward and placed a shield around himself, then expanded it into a barrier. The young man flew forward straight into a vortex in the ocean, surrounded by golden light. Behind him, enveloped in the same barrier, flew the rest of his team and Izunami himself. After a few short moments, they all sank to the seafloor. Izunami walked along the bottom, where many bones and skulls were scattered. The people stood in front of some kind of gorge which looked more like the lair of a ferocious monster. Suddenly, a strange sound was heard from the gorge, but Izunami was already ready to repel the attacks. She and another girl behind her took defensive stances, ready for battle. Izunami warned everyone that the beast would release the king's aura, so they shouldn't look into his eyes. Inari said that even in his young form, he had reached the 9th level of a magical beast. Susanoo looked at Inari with distrust and asked if she had made a mistake with the monster's level. Inari replied that this beast was much stronger than the king-level creature that attacked their base last month. Hearing what Inari said, Izunami said that such a powerful primordial animal would definitely give them a lot of essence. Izunami prepared to attack the enemy. She turned to Benton and told her to use her illusion magic to take control of him. The rest of the plan was to wait for all of his essence to the last drop and destroy the corpse without leaving a trace. The monster sitting in the cave became even more furious and released its thorns. Benton created an illusion and tensed, trying to hold it. The monster came out of the cave, trying to somehow scare and push those present. Izunami said that this beast was very beautiful and they had to absorb it, collect it, and become it. Darkness will consume everything. Chaos will rule everything. Izunami called everyone to pray to the darkness, to pray to chaos, to pray to eternal existence. The interweaving of darkness and light will become nothing. But they were supposed to become immortal. They were supposed to become gods. Their desire for transcendental power never diminished. As the flames of destruction tore through the skies, a mushroom cloud blossomed, symbolizing the end shrouded in death. The shockwave shook the earth like a divine punishment, and civilization and order turned into splinters. The world became primordial chaos. 30 days and nights passed, and only then did the ashes settle. The once towering mountains turned into deserts, the fast rivers became dead lakes. Survivors looked in horror through the cracks in the blasted earth. The remains of colossal beasts the size of mountains glowed with a strange metallic sheen, even after destruction remained in battle poses, as if quietly telling the story of a lost era. In their crystallized bone marrow, they found a substance that sparkled like stars. When light fell on it, the substance pulsated as if alive, refracting the colors of the visible spectrum. After research, they finally discovered her secret. She could reconstruct the molecular structure of living beings. The Prime Minister held up a flask of glowing blue material at a press conference and announced that they were to crown themselves gods today. But soon fate showed its terrible face, and the first volunteers turned into crystal statues in the sacred blue light. Their expressions were forever frozen, and their mortal flesh was like tissue paper trying to survive the flames. Finally, they realized that this was not the power of creation. Since human bodies became ordinary clay, it could not be a sacred gift from the gods. But after the apocalypse, some people and survivors who came into contact with a substance of divine origin were able to evolve, collecting monsters. Only then did they realize that mythology had not abandoned them, but had accelerated them. In this era, they were the successors of myth. Izunami, with a blissful expression on her face, announced to everyone that they were to become gods. In the midst of their chanting about the importance of praying to the gods, Izunami suddenly heard someone arrive. A man appeared on the head of the huge lizard, looking a little disheveled. He stood up and said that it would be better if all these people prayed to him, and his name was Chen. The blonde turned to Inari and ordered her to analyze the information immediately. The girl with red eyes took off her fox mask, smiling slyly. But then Inari put the mask back on her face using Koju's divine gaze. Inari looked at the blue-haired man who seemed to have fallen from the sky. Chen looked at her and asked if this was a sensory ability like observation haki. Then the boy's eyes flashed brightly as he muttered that it was much lower in power. And just a moment later, the fox's mask began to crack, and purple smoke slowly rose from it. Then Inari suddenly swayed and fell down, trying to grab onto something. The Great One recoiled in fear, looking at the enemy in front of her and not even paying attention to the body behind her. Turning sharply and opening her blue eyes wide, she asked where the intellect was. Inari replied that the enemy had the same mystical ability of foresight, and her divine gaze was reflected. The blonde's eyes widened even more, and then she asked again in bewilderment. A masked brunette appeared behind her and said that he didn't care what kind of magic Chen had, because he would destroy it with one blow. The red mask had several horns on it as it rushed towards Chen, telling the bastard to die. Chen smirked and avoided the blow, jumping into the air and asking how dare he attack first. Then the man with blue hair turned around in surprise, looking at the enemy. But a moment later, Chen easily kicked the enemy away, causing him to stumble onto the stakes. A certain man's hand turned ice cold as he suddenly decided to block Chen's attack. And then the elf slowly began to lift the body of his comrade, not allowing him to stumble upon the stakes. The brunette acted cautiously, clearly worried about his comrade and calculating every action. Chen leaned over and said that the guy had a very beautiful ability to control gravity. The masked strongman exclaimed to Daikokuten that Chen should stay away. Daikokuten continued to use his power and his hand turned half white. Daikokuten flew into the air, and when there was no longer any danger beneath his comrade, he threw him to the ground. Daikokuten then extended his hand towards Chen, saying that it was now his turn to feel the piercing. Daikokuten pressed his hands to the ground and heavy stones immediately began to fall from the ceiling. Chen ducked down, trying to protect himself from the sharp debris that was flying towards him. But just a moment later, a powerful explosion was heard at the place where Chen stood, causing Daikokuten to stagger. The brunette's eyes widened and he asked if even gravity didn't affect Chen. Strong discharges of red lightning began to appear near Chen Chu's body, which was floating in the air. The fox exclaimed in surprise that their enemy could neutralize absolutely all forces. Daikokuten's hands shook as he asked if Chen could suppress divine power. The masked man said that since Chen Chu dared to insult him, he should pay for it with blood. The man then suddenly attacked Chen using the iron cannon Nurad. Chen only chuckled in response and thought about the fact that the enemy was actually using physical techniques. And then Chen Chu intercepted his enemy's fist, causing him to stagger back. And then small explosions were heard behind Chen and the ground beneath them began to crack. The masked man clenched his teeth in anger and loudly exclaimed that Chen was a real monster. In response, Chen Chu only smirked and frowned, looking at the enemy with shining eyes. The man tried to hit Chen again, who broke his bone with one blow. And just a moment later, Chen sharply pushed the enemy away from himself, forcing him to merge with the floor. Then Chen flew up and swung, and the masked man realized that he would not be able to repel the attack and would die. But a moment later, Daikokuten intervened in their fight, using a lot of his power. Flying sharply through the air, Daikokuten threw his comrade's body as far away from Chen as possible. But a moment later, the man managed to get back on his feet, and wisps of smoke appeared before his eyes. But when the smoke slowly began to clear, Chen's silhouette became visible among the stones of the cave. Flying into the air, Chen's hair turned snow-white, and it was as if a pair of red lightning bolts had passed through his body. The Great One stretched out his hands and asked the gods of Takamagahara to join forces to defeat the enemy. The gods immediately obeyed her, and a certain man in yellow began to pull stone hands out of the floor. Chen Chu froze for a moment, looking at the dozens of hands that were reaching out to him from the ground. Then the man in the yellow outfit smirked as he looked at Chen, who was trapped. Then the man suddenly bent down to the ground, and strange folds immediately appeared across the mountain's relief. Then dozens of stakes rose from the ground at a furious speed and headed towards Chen. But when the stones almost covered the man's entire body, Chen suddenly frowned more deeply and his eyes flashed. Chen's enemy imprisoned him in a stone ball, saying that his weapon, fortified with divine power, was stronger than iron. The man insisted that even if Chen had outstanding abilities, he would still suffocate in his prison. But then the fox-masked maiden stretched out her hand in fear and said that Chen was melting stones with incredible heat. And just a moment later, stones suddenly flew out of the prison, which melted in a second. Chen stood trapped, his hands tearing apart a hole in the prison that was burning brightly with flames. The masked strongman exclaimed that his ally's stone shell was as soft as stretched natto. The strongman asked what use the man was, and he immediately attacked Chen again. Jumping into the air, the brunette exclaimed that since 2 layers were not enough, a third should be added. And a few moments later, the man used the shackles of the god, creating a huge golden palace. But then the man suddenly fell to the ground, as if he could no longer fight. The brunette muttered that that triple connection had used up all his divine powers. The strongman said that he was just joking and did not ask his comrade to use his strongest ability. Then a red-haired man flew up in the sky, saying that no one had survived in the heavenly golden palace yet, so the battle was over. Strongman said that he thought Chen was some big shot, but wasn't he destroyed by the Takamagahara pantheon? The Great One barely smiled and said that it was time to move on to the next one, since the obstacle had been removed. Then the blonde turned around and said that now it was time for them to finish off the lizard and suck out its essence. The Great One turned to Inari and asked what her divine vision saw. But Inari's attention was already focused on the Golden Palace, saying that she could not cope with the seal. Inari exclaimed in fear that Chen could climb over metal structures, and just a moment later, many terrifying lightning bolts began to thunder from the Golden Palace. The lizard ended up behind the palace, and Chen said that if they wanted to hunt the monster, they should first step over its corpse. And just a moment later, Chen destroyed the shackles of the Golden Palace, ordering them not to blame him for trampling their corpses. The man in the yellow robe exclaimed in fear that he had definitely sealed Chen. And just a moment later, the man's body met a giant golden stone that fell from the sky. Inari leaned against the ground and tried to cover her head with her hands, almost screaming in horror. The man suddenly flew into the air and said that he would take the corpses of his enemies one by one. Red lightning flashed through the man's body as he said he would grind everyone into dust. The red-haired man exclaimed that Chen had killed his comrades, and anyone who tried to block the path to the deity would only meet death. The man shouted that his divine power was capable of creating a karmic flame that would burn for a week, while the fire of his comrades would be more suitable for heating tea. Smiling brightly, the red-haired man used the netherworld karmic annihilation arrow. The red-haired man then clenched his teeth tighter and shouted angrily, advising Chen to die. Jumping high into the air, the man abruptly aimed a flaming arrow at his enemy. But Chen Chu continued to just watch what was happening while the flames burned behind him. And a moment later, the guy just grinned and then breathed a sigh of relief. Flames swirled around Chen Chu's body as a cloud of smoke approached him. Looking at this sight, the red-haired man even choked, looking at Chen in bewilderment. The strong man exclaimed that it was time for them to stop chatting. He would attack from below. Daikokuten would support from the air and the rest would press from above. And then the 3 men immediately went on the attack, using all their abilities. The Great One gritted her teeth and whispered in irritation that Chen could actually fight the 3 of them at the same time. One girl stretched her hands forward and frowned deeply, asking who would help her defeat the demon. And just a moment later, the strongman swung at Chen with all his might, using the angry Rakshas cannon. But Chen Chu managed to knock the man out with just one blow and push him away, slamming him into the ground. Chen used Yomi's flame annihilation Murata, and fire swirled around him. Inari exclaimed that Daikokutin must be careful because this is the mark that seals the dragon. The guy looked at his feet in bewilderment, where huge yellow runes were already visible, and then the man's body began to slowly become encased in golden chains, but he could not resist them. Daikokutin fell hard onto the seal and screamed loudly in pain as the chain squeezed his neck. Inari exclaimed in fear that this was magic of a higher order than the Abisu seal. The Great One asked what Ben 10 was going to do. She replied that it was time for them to psychologically unite and act. The girl's face transformed. Her mouth widened as if it had burst and a long tongue appeared from it. Ben 10 said that even if the demon's physical body was strong, it would not be able to repel her psychological attack. Coming closer to Chen, she exclaimed that upon hearing the voice from Yomi Kotodam, he should fall. Chen, who had been strangling the red-haired enemy earlier, froze for a moment and looked at her in confusion. And just a moment later, Chen Chu abruptly threw the man's body away from himself, who screamed in fear. Yomi opened her mouth wide, saying that she would bind Chen's soul, for it was the law of death, like a mother's embrace and a child's grip. Raising her hands to the sky, she commanded Chen to fall and plunge into the path of Yomi, where even gods fall. The red-haired man said that the devil could no longer move because he was immersed in a nightmare world. After some time, Chen was already back in his true form in a strange place. Towering over him was the enormous Yomi, whose body was cracked. She said that strength didn't matter there because Chen was in her mental world. Chen suddenly became covered in ice, and Yomi kept saying that his physical magic was useless and he couldn't use witchcraft either. Chen's body was pierced by beams as Yomi said that this was a solo arena for spiritual combat. And after just a few blows, Chen began to cough up black blood, unable to bear it. The girl towered over him and asked if he was in pain. It was just that in her world the feeling of pain was heightened. Yomi exclaimed that Chen also couldn't lose consciousness, but on the contrary, he would become even more clear-minded. The girl pierced Chen's body with dozens of beams again, saying that every nerve of his would feel agony. A huge pool of blood was already visible under Chen when he thoughtfully said that since this was a mental world, these were imaginary wounds. Coughing up blood, the man smiled and asked if such wounds could really be fatal. Yomi exclaimed that her Kotodoma would make him kneel and beg for death, because even now, Chen was thinking about attempting suicide. But the man ignored her words and smiled, saying that he meant something else. Chen straightened up and said that if he didn't even feel pain, then her Kotodoma was just an annoying noise. The girl's face began to crack as she cried out in fear that this was impossible. And just a moment later, Yomi struck the man's chest again, sending him flying. Then the girl smiled nervously and thoughtfully asked if Chen really didn't feel pain. Chen said that if this feeling of pain was taken as 100 points, then the pain from his blood boiling while activating the Crimson Flame bloodburst could be considered 1,000,000. Hearing these words, the girl's face suddenly changed and she smiled madly. The man's eyes flashed a bright blue light as he said that Yomi's imagination was quite interesting. The man then suddenly raised his chin, saying that from now on Yomi's soul would remember only one thing. Chen said that Yomi had lost, and those words were etched into her mind like shards. The girl fell to the ground and began to spin, repeating only one phrase about her loss. The Great One at that moment looked in surprise at the face of Yomi, who was lying on the floor with drops of blood on her face. But a moment later, the man smiled mockingly and ordered the girl to stand up. And a moment later, Yomi suddenly stood up from the floor and flew exhausted towards Chen. The Great One asked if Chen had made Shentian her puppet and her Kododama had reflected on her. Then Shentian took up her sword and said that they needed to get out of this sinister place. The Great One hissed through her teeth that this was betrayal, because she was trained to kill her master. Chen said that their battle was over and it was time for them to leave, and his control over the victor's aura would wear off on its own in 3 days. But the Great One raised her hand and said that those who dare to challenge the deity will pay with their blood. The Great One said that Ben 10 could now die, and a moment later, a man with wings and a mask beheaded her. Chen cursed and said that it was the first time he had seen someone so cruel, killing himself. Inari asked why the great ruler did this, since Ben 10 was one of them. She replied that the useless have no right to become gods. Then the blonde frowned and smiled, saying that the shell of a loser was not worthy of the gift sent by the gods. The Great One looked at the sky, saying that the interweaving of light and darkness, the cycle of life and death, everything will return to oblivion, and they must become gods. Opening her arms, the blonde said that the interweaving of light and darkness, the cycle of life, is all Takamagahara's dance of death. But the man looked down and then grinned, using a bloody explosion of crimson flame. And a moment later, the man's body turned red, and here and there scales were visible. His hair became lighter and horns appeared from his head. The blonde asked fearfully what actually connected Chen and the lizard, since their powers were so similar. And then the blonde suddenly rushed forward, smashing the ground under his feet to pieces. The blonde's eyes widened in fear and she immediately recoiled from the man. But when Chen was about to catch up with the girl, she was suddenly covered by the wings of her comrade. But Chen wasn't going to stop there, striking the gray wings again and again. A man with a red face and a long nose suddenly pounced on Chen, causing him to jump back. But then the man suddenly jumped into the air using the ability of Yata no Kagami, Shinsho Yokurin. But the man at that moment barely swayed, as if trying to resist the light. Chen covered his face with his hands as if to avoid the bright light hitting his face. Chen Chu then leaned down even more, clenching his teeth tighter and protecting his body. The blonde said that Yokurin is able to pierce the shields of demonic animals. It's like microwaves that destroy from the inside. Then Chen's eyes flashed brightly as he suddenly straightened up and coughed up blood. And just a moment later, Chen Chu screamed loudly and pulled out a huge sword, near which lightning was visible. And a moment later, Chen suddenly thrust the tip of the knife into the floor as if cutting through stone. Pulling his sword forward, a small red shield appeared next to Chen Chu, blocking him from the rays. But at the same time, somewhere under the floor, a certain man was slowly crawling, watching what was happening. Then the man gripped his sword tighter and tried to attack Chen Chu from behind, using the strongest demonic attack. Quietly approaching the enemy, the man suddenly thrust a knife into Chen's back, causing him to burst into purple smoke. But then the man suddenly opened his eyes wide in horror and surprise as he looked at Chen. Chen Chu was now wearing the Demon Emperor armor, which allowed him to avoid the attack. Turning around abruptly and waving his hand, Chen Chu hissed through his teeth that the man should get lost. And just a moment later, Chen Chu used firepower, swirling the enemy's body in flames. The Great One looked at this and said that where there is light, there is also shadow, and as long as the latter exists, Tsuku Yomi is immortal. At the same time, Chen Chu towered over the body of his enemy who was trying to fight him. And a moment later, the red-haired man hit Chen using the shadow destruction skill. But Chen was once again unmoved. He merely clenched his fists and assumed a fighting stance. The red-haired guy muttered under his breath that Chen had an amazing defense system. At this time, there were still two enemies standing behind Chen directing light at him. And then a man with a red face and small horns suddenly attacked his opponent. With a strike from behind, the old man easily managed to knock Chen Chu to the ground, knocking the sword out of his hands. But the guy immediately tried to get up, looking at his wounded hand in bewilderment. The Great One said that Tengu's attacks could destroy the enemy's defense. Even the strongest shield would be destroyed with one breath. Quickly getting up from the floor, Chen looked tensely at his sword, which was a couple of meters away from him. But then Chen Chu just chuckled and said that it was a good try. And just a moment later, several sharp swords were aimed at Tengu and he could only try to dodge. But then the red-haired man tried to strike Chen again, but he jumped up in time. The man tried to strike the enemy again by jumping up, but it was useless. The man used various tactics, even tried to use binding. But everything was useless against Chen. Chen then suddenly jumped up and broke the enemy's sword with one blow, calling him trash. Looking at the strange spirit next to him, Chen asked if it couldn't be killed while the shadow existed. The man then used the explosion, saying that it then ruined the shadows along with him. The explosion sent the red-haired man flying, leaving him lying on the ground in agony and covered in smoke. But the man wasn't going to stop there. And flying higher, he swung again. Chen then struck the enemy's body with all his might, breaking even the floor into pitiful pieces. The red-haired man's eyes immediately rolled back and a thin stream of blood flowed from his mouth. Chen stood on the rubble, his body ablaze, as he asked if anyone else dared to speak out against him. The red-haired girl immediately rushed forward towards the corpse, calling him her brother, but Tengu stopped her. The old man continued to stare tensely at the girl's tear-stained face, not allowing her to go further. The Great One asked why the red-haired man and Inari were standing still instead of attacking Chen. But the red-haired man only cast a doubtful glance at Inari, who was trembling with fear. The red-haired girl trembled in anger, exclaiming, "How dare they sell her labor? Are those bastards really looking for death?" But then the girl with yellow eyes fell to her knees, choking with tears and asking why such a sacrifice. The Great One appeared behind her and reminded her that she had allowed all of her brothers to be killed in order to obtain the essence of animal origin. The blonde pointed her finger at Chen, saying that since they were future gods, they had to kill this demon. With her head down, the girl said that they would get enough essence to gain power, but she didn't want to become stronger anymore. But a moment later, the Great One's hand suddenly squeezed the girl's neck, lifting her from her knees. The blonde showered the girl with tears and said that if she wanted to be a normal person and a good sister, then she was just a coward. The Great One said that she had betrayed the oath of the Yaki clan, and this is a grave crime because they are the heirs of the myth and are constantly evolving. The girl repeated the words she had long since learned, saying that this would be until they touched the divine world, and then loudly sent the blonde away. Squeezing her neck even more tightly, the Great One ordered Tengu to kill the traitor, whose heart still wavered, for she was unworthy of the divine ship. But Tengu, in response, merely demonstratively turned away from the great ruler. Then the blonde swore softly and turned her gaze to Inari and the man in front of her. At that moment, the sound of Chen's knife stabbing into the ground of the battlefield was heard. Chen said that he had no intention of fighting them to the death, so they could give up their hostility and leave. The Great One's eyes flashed brightly with flame, and her face turned black as she said that it was unthinkable to want to give up. Scales appeared on the girl's skin, and their size increased several times when snakes appeared from her hair. The red-haired girl's eyes turned white a second before the snake in front of her opened its mouth. The Great One exclaimed that every drop of essence would be her food as the girl was being devoured by a snake behind her. Having swallowed the girl in one bite, the snow-white snake with red eyes smiled contentedly. Raising her hands to the sky and laughing loudly, the girl exclaimed that all their powers would become hers. The rest of those present were unable to resist the girl, who was devouring even her own comrades. One by one, the snakes swallowed the bodies of those who refused that senseless slaughter. Some tried to resist, but against the maddened girl it was all in vain. Inari muttered that she was absorbing the Yaki clan's abilities, and the red-haired man realized who the Great One truly saw them as. The blonde turned around and said that it was even funny, because they were all nothing more than reservoirs for cultivating essence. Her eyes blazed brightly as she exclaimed that out of all of them, she alone was worthy of becoming a god. Chen Chu jokingly said that this was an unexpected plot twist, because they really had problems within their own ranks. The masked strongman turned around and said that although he couldn't stand Chen, it was the clan's personal matter, so if he wanted to live, let him go. And just a moment later, the strongman suddenly lifted a huge stone into the air and swung it. Leaping high into the air, the strongman threw a stone at the Great One, exclaiming that this was a battle for survival. But the girl immediately formed a shield near herself and repelled the man's blow, breaking the stones. The girl then smiled and asked if he was another dog who would kill his own owner. And just a moment later, the blonde suddenly lifted all the small stones into the air. Daikokuten barked out that they were all orphans, test subjects, survivors of disasters. The memory of how they were all given a small, glowing stone for the first time flashed before the man's eyes. The Great One united the abandoned children, saying that by becoming gods they would be able to escape the suffering of mortals. And then suddenly, those stones sank into the children's chests, leaving only small fragments outside. Most of the children died immediately, but 2 remained, who glowed brightly, looking stunned at the corpses around them. Then the blonde smiled brightly and told them that they would now be the Yaki clan. Daikokuten used force, exclaiming that from the very beginning they gathered and became a clan for only one reason. The man exclaimed, gathering his strength, that they all just wanted to move on with their lives. But the blonde abruptly stopped the man's attempts to stop her by creating a huge dome. Daikokuten frowned in response and said that he had already received the powers of light and darkness, so she could not defeat him. The girl ignored him, only stretched out her scaly hand forward and smiled slyly. But a moment later, the man seemed to be enveloped in strange tentacles binding him. The snakes circled around him and pressed him, but Daikokuten exclaimed that he would never submit to her. But a moment later, the blonde suddenly crushed the man in the clutches of the blue snakes. Looking at the man's death, the girl only grinned, and the satisfied snake slowly approached her. And just a moment later, the black snake opened its mouth wide, while small stones were hovering around it. Flying even higher into the air, the girl laughed madly, and Chen only watched her. The great ruler ordered them to rise as she suddenly raised her hand to the sky. And just a moment later, the masked strongman began to slowly rise from the ground, following the stones. Inari and the red-haired man also rose into the air, looking at the girl in fear. And then the Great One ordered them to give up their powers because they were already in her power. But suddenly a man grabbed Inari's leg, knocking her to the ground. Chen put the girl down on the ground, and she only awkwardly asked why he was doing this. The red-haired man flew towards the Great One, exclaiming that he would fight to the last. The strong man also swung sharply and exclaimed that even if they had to die, they would not let her win. But in response, the blonde only laughed barely audibly, looking at her imaginary enemies. And just a moment later, the girl directed her hungry snakes at the 2 men. But the strong man easily managed to knock out the snake with one blow, causing it to cough up blood. The other man burst into flames, exclaiming that even if he couldn't fight back, he would pull her along with him. Then the snake opened its mouth wide and began to breathe fire, using a flash of rage. But a moment later, the snow-white snake swallowed the bright solar ball. And then there was a loud explosion that came straight from the snake that was growing out of the rocks. The blonde said that he would rather destroy himself than let her consume him. At the same time, another snake approached the corpse of its comrade, taking the red stone that remained from it. The snake placed the stone in the hands of the blonde, who smirked and said that Kagutsuchi was too naive. The Great One said that Kagutsuchi's body is just a vessel for essence, and even if he kills himself, the stone inside him will not dissipate. Then the snake smiled affectionately and snuggled up to its owner, barely sticking out its tongue. But a moment later, the snake burst into a bright flame and headed back into battle. Now the corpses of two men lay in front of the girl, and her snake sparkled brightly in different colors. The girl smiled nastily and flashed her scarlet eyes, saying that she had already absorbed 7. Then the blonde's gaze fell on Inari, who was fearfully clutching a dagger and standing next to Chen. The girl recoiled and muttered that they had no choice because even killing themselves was useless. Tengu continued to hide behind his own wings, tensely watching what was happening. But then the blonde flew up and said that there were only 2 left. The Tengu, who stood opposite the ruler, immediately assumed a fighting stance and clenched his teeth. And just a moment later, the man seemed to disappear, leaving behind only the remains of feathers. Then the girl smirked and raised her head, haughtily asking if they had really run away. The blonde smiled wildly and said thoughtfully that it was a smart, cowardly, and realistic choice. Inari pleaded with Chen, saying that with his power, he would definitely be able to destroy the crystal with the essence inside her. Inari approached Chen and asked him to kill her and then destroy the crystal, because she did not want to become part of Izanami's power. Inari exclaimed that Chen could definitely do it, but he just smiled in confusion. Izanami appeared behind Inari and said that she wanted to use the demon to destroy the essence, which meant she had betrayed the will of the Takamagahara gods. The girl turned away again and asked Hen to kill her as quickly as possible and destroy the crystal. Inari leaned down and tried to put the sword into Chen's hands, exclaiming that otherwise it would be too late. Looking at her former comrade, Izanari laughed and asked if she really wanted to die. Izanari exclaimed that she would squeeze the origin essence out of this demon and lizard at the same time. With her head wide open and a wild smile on her face, Izanari exclaimed that she would ascend to the gods. But a moment later, Chenchu suddenly snatched the spear from Izanari's hands, causing her to freeze. But the man chuckled sharply and walked away from Inami, saying that she didn't need to die at all. Chen went to the ruler, who exclaimed that they had sacrificed themselves to the new god. But Chen chose to ignore the statement, simply frowning and taking a fighting stance. And then the blonde began to direct beams of energy and snakes at Chen, but he easily dodged. Chen exclaimed that he had decided not to interfere in their quarrel, but she tried to drag the sword lizard into it, so he changed his mind. And just a moment later, Chen Chu pierced the blonde's head, causing her to freeze for a moment. But then the girl pulled the weapon out of her head, saying that this power was not enough to kill her. But Chen wasn't going to stop there, and so he took another swing at the blonde. Pushing the ruler away again, he smashed her body onto the floor and said that today was her end. The battle was in full swing when someone started attacking with full force. One of the attackers held her mask to keep it from falling off completely. The man with the enhanced arms asked her how she felt about his blows. He continued to strike at her again, but only raised dust. By this time, Izunami had begun to transform into something strange, and said that the blow didn't even tickle her. Another attacker uttered some kind of spell about lightning hardening the body and fire forging bones. The next moment, it began to strengthen and transform into a new form. Everyone present looked at him with distorted, disbelieving eyes. The man rose higher into the sky, and Izunami prepared to repel another attack. The sounds of blows cut through the air with renewed force every now and then, and stones and dust flew from all sides. 2 monsters fought each other, and the girl leading one of them tried to dodge new attacks. The attacking man smirked and looked at her with hatred, saying that she had dodged again. He said that if she still had any tricks left, now was the time to use them. Izunami folded her hands in a prayer gesture and was about to summon some new monster. She released several black snakes and deftly directed them towards the killer. The girl's opponent also raised his hand up, intending to cast some new spell. At one point, a ball of lightning appeared around him, protecting him from all of his opponent's attacks. The girl was horrified to realize that the Yamada dungeon, her hidden technique, had not worked. The man continued to menacingly approach the poor girl. Lightning was still striking around him and he looked extremely menacing. Izunami thought that this monster, even when walking, his blood pressure seemed more terrible than that of the gods. She decided to try to defeat him again and began to cast a new spell. The next moment, the girl again began to control her white snakes and directed them at the enemy. A huge snake appeared behind the monster she was fighting. He turned to look at her and several curse words came out of his mouth. The man immediately deftly surrounded the strange animal with his magical lightning. But it didn't work and the monster immediately headed towards him, changing color. The man tried again to call upon his magical powers for self-defense. He found himself pinned to the ground by the huge bulk of the blue snake, but he still resisted. Having avoided another attack, the man rose back to his feet and looked as angry as possible. But as soon as he stood up, the snake opened its mouth and prepared to eat the fighter. He didn't expect such an attack from the snake at all, so he was momentarily confused. Izunami realized that she had finally gained some sort of advantage. The girl looked at her opponent and was glad that he had finally calmed down. The snake she summoned has now disappeared underground again. The man who had just been devoured looked at what was happening and found no words to react. The huge snake, which seemed to be going underground, now began to writhe to the sides in pain. Izunami didn't understand what was happening and how it all came to this, so she froze in place. The snake that had been her trump card was now cut in two. Behind her, the enemy's voice sounded, saying that even after absorbing her comrades, she was still weak. The next moment, a vine wrapped around the still, stunned girl's neck. Drops of blood appeared on the girl's neck and she screamed that she was a goddess and therefore could not die. She had to rise above all, she had to ascend to the divine palace. She was supposed to look down on all living things from the heights of a deity, but now she was slowly dying. The man looked at the dying Izunami and said that she had had enough of crimes. The girl still refused to believe that death awaited her in a few seconds. Even lying on the ground and bleeding, she found the strength to repeat the words that this could not be. Meanwhile, her partner with a fox mask was sitting somewhere near the rock. The same man who had dealt with Izunami herself a few minutes ago approached her. He looked down at the girls and said that Izunami was gone. Chen raised a girl with a fox mask from the seabed. They jumped out of the water and headed towards some ship nearby. There, in a foreign language, two people were talking about not knowing who these two were. Chen looked at the people around him and thought that they were foreigners. He tried to explain something to these people as clearly as possible, gesturing actively. From his gestures, he was asking the sailors to take her to shore. Then the man asked them if they understood his words. The two men looked like they weren't paying any attention to what Chen was trying to convey to them. And the young man couldn't understand whether they understood anything or not, and this only made the situation worse. But they brought her to shore anyway. Humanity was a species extremely prone to strife and selfishness. The number of people killed at the hands of their comrades was greater than the number of victims of disasters. Most people, having gained strength, did not remember to protect the weak or restore justice, but pointed the sword at the weaker. Chen did not deny that in this world there would always be good people willing to step forward. But human nature was too stubborn and bad to help someone selflessly. Seeing Chen effectively take the girl with the mask from the ship, the two sailors were perplexed. Chen had no hesitation in assuming the worst of anyone who might threaten his survival. He was not good, he did not translate his soul into tears, but he was also not evil, since he did not feed on bitter hatred. Chen was not chaos, since he did not stir up the ashes of all living things, and he was also not order, since he did not connect the roots of the universe. He was not light, since he did not illuminate the path of the lost, but he was not darkness either, since he did not hide the peeping fire. He was not the truth, because he did not forge an eternal form, and he was not an illusion, because he did not leave a vanishing trace. Chen was just a blade hanging between good and evil, and he alone was going to cut through the twilight of chaos. In the special department, the commander showed his group a recording of Chen battle. The man said that according to the latest data, it was confirmed that Chen strength had exceeded the 5-star level. All the students were surprised and asked again if this was true and if they had heard correctly. The commander analyzed all of Chen attacks and said that, according to preliminary calculations, the force of the blow exceeded 1,500 tons. One of the young men present became confused and choked on water. He asked if this Chen was even a human being who could hit with such force. Another student said that his limit was 1.5 tons, which meant that Chen strength was 1,000 times greater than his own. Another student said that according to the world ranking of evolutionists, Chen was at level 6 or 7. Then he went over all the calculations a few more times and folded his hands, about to say something else. The commander said that once the evolved ones passed the 5-star level, physical strength ceased to be the criterion of strength, and all because it was replaced by a supernatural force. The young man asked if he would have such power if he leveled up enough. The commander replied that each country has its own system of evolution, and everyone's ultimate goal is to awaken supernatural abilities. For example, gravity control, fire raging throughout the body, telepathy, and so on. People were ready for anything. As far as the commander knew, the neighboring state was developing technologies to accelerate the evolution of their evolved ones. Then the man dashed all the students' hopes, saying that they were weaklings and hadn't even made it to 4 stars, but were already dreaming of God knows what. Hearing this, all the students stood up from their seats as one and putting their hands to their heads took an oath to Lord Guan. Chen Chu held the crystal in his hand and thought about how everyone said that this was a source, but in fact, it was just a slightly more advanced spiritual energy crystal. He thought about how Izanami never imagined that this thing would end up in his hands. The young man squeezed the crystal in his hand and immediately a system notification sounded that the body's characteristics had been increased. Chen Chu realized that he was stuck at 9,999, and his constitution points had reached their limit. Seeing that Chen Chu was deep in thought, Xiaoxi walked up to him. The girl sat down next to him and asked if Chen Chu was okay, but he was still frightened by her sudden appearance. The man sat up on the sofa and said that everything was fine. The girl said she wanted to eat, and the young man offered her the remains of the energy crystals. Hearing what was being offered to her, Xiaoxi was delighted and quickly agreed to take the crystals. She walked up to Chen Chu and was about to eat what was left of the crystals. The man told her to eat more, and when she became stronger and could restore the gate, they would go fight the monsters. The girl smiled and agreed to this, wanting to increase her strength faster. The station insisted that global pollution levels had increased sharply, drawing the attention of scientists to this. Drones were flying around the purple funnel, and the news was saying that those who had evolved below the 4th rank were forbidden to leave the cleansing field. Scientists ran around the bases in fear when they were told that contact with contamination would lead to irreversible mutation. At the same time, some people who were dressed in special uniforms were walking forward. All fighters were ordered to take up positions, since the first wave of pollution, according to preliminary data, would reach the defensive line in 72 hours. Meanwhile, in the villa by the mountains, everything was quite fine, and the sun was shining brightly over the house. Chen Chu opened his purple eyes wide, sparks of flame playing in them. A moment later, Chen suddenly rose from the bed, frowning and ruffling his hair. Pressing his lips into a thin line, Chen thought about his premonition that a terrible catastrophe was approaching. But just a few moments later, a girl in a tight suit arrived at the man's house. Chen Chu immediately snapped out of his thoughts and looked at the view outside the small window in front of him. Jian sat on the motorcycle as she took off her helmet, then shyly adjusted her hair as she turned around. Chen appeared at the passage and begged not to wake people up in the morning, and then asked what her name was. The girl pointed at herself and pronounced each syllable with displeasure, saying that her name was Huang Fujian. Looking at the bag of food, Chen awkwardly asked where the delivery was coming from, since he hadn't ordered anything for the past couple of days. The girl smiled softly and said that Chen had not ordered food for 2 days, and she was worried that he would die of hunger in his room. Jian handed him the bag and said that the one on the left was his favorite, the 3 times a week stewed chicken in sauce, and the one on the right was the malaro that Chen liked to order at night, spicy and with extra. Chen Chu crossed his arms and asked if this girl was sick and was stalking him. Jian called Chen senpai, pouting and repeating that she was going to court him. Jian handed him bags of food and said that this was why she was monitoring every moment of his life. Chen paused for a moment and turned his tense gaze to the 2 bags in his hands. Jian then walked away from Chen and said, turning around one last time, that he should eat while the food was still warm. Winking and smiling, the girl warned senpai that she was already leaving, and Chen Chu continued to stand in place, motionlessly watching Jian in the distance. Rolling his eyes, Chen wondered why Jian even cared whether he ordered food or not. But the flow of his irritated thoughts was interrupted by the rumbling of his stomach, which betrayed his hunger. Pushing the bags away from himself, Chen thought that this was all clearly a setup by this woman. And after some time, Cici appeared before the guy's eyes and turned to him. Cici quickly ran out onto the porch of their house, and Chen asked what had happened. The girl looked at the guy and said about Xiaoxi's new door, insisting that she already felt their readiness. Chen smiled brightly in response and said that this was great, and as soon as they had breakfast, they would leave immediately. After some time, Chen Chu found himself in an abandoned, unfinished tower where a portal had opened. Cici flew up to the huge black hole in the air, saying that they were already there. There were purple stones flying around the portal, and Sai said that she was starting to open them, and Chu should be more careful. In response, the man only smiled brightly, looking at the stones rising into the sky. A hint has appeared that the Emperor Demon Armor increases resistance to contaminated energy. Chen asked Qi to begin, and she immediately approached the door, which began to smoke blue. A few moments later, a furious stream of purple energy was directed at Chen Chu, which almost knocked him off his feet. Chen asked if the level of infection was so high that it couldn't be contained even with the armor's enhanced protection. After some time, the man found himself in complete darkness and wandered off into the distance. With a heavy frown and his eyes flashing, Chen Chu ordered his color of perception to bloom. And a moment later, Chen looked up at the huge stone that almost crushed him. But just a moment later, Chen sharply cut the stone into two parts with just one blow. Having fallen further, a small explosion was left from the stone, blowing up everything that was nearby. Sitting on a rock amidst the clouds of smoke, Chen asked if his enemy would attack a second after meeting. Chen laughed and said, "That was right," turning his gaze to the four-legged monster. A hint appeared that Chen had discovered a four-armed primate demon that had scales. Chen Chu continued to sit on the rocks even when the monster suddenly disappeared into the floor. But a moment later, the monster was behind Chen, but he managed to react in time. Chen then frowned and looked at his opponent with interest as the degree of infection increased.